Oh, it's running it right there. Right now. I can't. Oh shoot. Okay, it's not sharing your screen right now. We're going to play this game, unfortunately. Okay. All right. All right. Oh yeah. Is there a button to do that? Would you like Cortana? Oh, is that the one? I think.
Well, that says cooler, warmer.
Okay.
That's probably that screen.
That might be that screen.
Is this one for each window?
I don't know. Let's find out. I love it. Oh, probably should have asked Corey before he stepped out of the room, but that's not on. So I can always, unless it's by the front. Is there a blinds button in there? Okay. Well, while we're waiting for facilities to help us darken the room, which as us IT people would be desired anyways, we'll do some quick introductions. I will go ahead and let you go first, Sam. Appreciate you all for being here as part of this Intune session. We've got quite a bit to cover. And we'll definitely, as we kind of get through each of the live demos, definitely open up for any Q&A. But first of all, we'll kind of go through and introduce ourselves, as well as some high levels around Intune, talk about endpoint configuration, application packaging, and update management. And then we'll get into the endpoint security landscape, compliance, and proactive remediation pieces of Intune. Sam.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Sam Bender. I'm a technical architect at Concurrency. I specialize in modern workplace and endpoint solutions primarily. I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to talk. So I have been interested in technology forever. I grew up Mac and Windows, have owned several businesses, first of which got me really invested in technology. In middle school, I started a computer resale business and refurbished pretty much every kind of device you can imagine, and have sold them. Switched into another industry for a while, thought it was a little bit boring, kind of wanted to get back into technology after I decided that just doing business contacts and sales was a little bit boring. So that segued me into starting my eBay business back up, and then I decided I didn't want to do that exactly anymore, and then moved to Chicago on a whim and didn't know what I wanted to do. No job, no nothing. Then I started working for an MSP, got a lot of experience there, moved to another MSP, got a lot of experience there. Then moved into more of a networking role, and then did some contract work, and then now I do professional services. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sam. And a little bit about myself. Been speaking here at the user group probably since the beginning in 2017. So it's exciting to see new faces and familiar faces. I've been with Concurrency for 8 years. I was one of the solution architects there now, kind of over the modern workplace practice. So anything M365 cloud and their equivalent on-premises components, as well as been in Microsoft consulting for over 20 years now. Married, slightly longer than my IT career. And then whenever I'm not behind the keyboard, I love to travel, DJ around the world, and I'm a foodie. So if you want to have some good food spots, let me know. All right, so we're going to dive in to Windows endpoints. So, Sam.
And I wanted to add one more personalizing thing that makes me sound like a human and not just somebody who does work all the time. I grew up dancing for 18 years competitively and went to an art school. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
And I somehow landed in the world of tech. So
I have an important question.
Sure.
DJ
which one? So I actually have 4 projects. So I wish I actually had it. So if I put my hair down, it would probably really answer the question, but it's trance Jesus. So so a DJ here locally, Minneapolis, quite a bit, and played some festivals and other places around the world. So yeah, like music when I'm not behind the computer, which surprisingly these days, you spend more time behind the computer preparing your music than actually standing behind the decks DJing. So the world is very interesting. It's all technology driven, which is cool.
excellent. So I guess we'll
Thanks for
dive in.
asking.
The primary objective here today is to kind of give a rundown of Windows devices being managed within the Intune suite. We're focusing on security landscape as well. We're working with E5 licensing and Intune, the Intune suite licensing, and we may pull in a Windows 365 instance as well. And we will be enrolled. This device is enrolled in autopilot already, just because sometimes that does take a little while, and I didn't want to sit here for an hour while we just kind of wait for a computer to provision. So it's pre-enrolled, but we will be walking through how to set up baseline configuration for this machine that just kind of fits every business case and just kind of standards. I mean, it's obviously not going to be catered to every single use case, but it should give a good overview and rundown of what the possibilities are with Intune. So yes, so I want to start out with a little bit of a discussion. How do your organizations manage devices? What issues do you potentially have with those? Like, what are caveats that you frequently run into as a business? And I'm asking that as a question, I guess.
So I'm here because my organization is trying to find a way to use Intune and use some of the security features like just-in-time access, so that if we want to have our help desk do stuff that typically our more senior folks like myself in person will do, give them their appropriate access at a certain time, let them do what they need to do, and restrict that access. And also trying to get away from having multiple different software and platforms to control our end-user devices, use everything through Azure and Office 365 to do like Intune new patching, send out patching with like Windows or other OS applications as well. That's what I'm trying to get out of here, to understand how that is the deployment process, so then we can start.
We love to refer to that as streamline and simplify, as you probably heard with some of the Microsoft presentations. But no, that's a very common one. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
I think for us, so we just did a rollout of new pieces this year, and we used autopilot. That went pretty smoothly. Our big thing right now is local admin rights. We don't give it to our users. Right now, the way we got it is they reach out to us and we just give them that Azure role, the local device. There's got to be an easier, so they don't have to always reach out to us. I guess that's my big question today. But other than that, it's pretty good.
How to leverage the endpoint privilege management. So we'll talk about that in the security section.
And that's actually why it took us a little bit to get this computer enrolled while we were starting out.
We over secured it. Sure.
And so BYOD, right? Laptops, mobile devices. Yeah, everyone goes to one spot, register the devices, technical policy.
It's a great one.
Anybody else have any requests? Also, feel free to stop us along the way, too, if you want to chime in or ask a question as we're going. I know I can get carried away and go a little fast, so if you need me to slow down or what have you, I'm happy to.
And specifically, what regards are you looking?
Have like a hybrid co-managed environment.
Sure.
historically devices. Locally,
Sure.
subscription field is not. This has AD.
Right.
For devices. Seriously. Also using an attribute.
I've had a number of customers ask that one. I think I've actually even talked to some people at like MMS about that, you know, in certain fields that they have the ability to sync up. So I've captured that one. Let's talk about that one offline, because that's get some more use cases around that, and might be able to talk to the product team about that a little bit more. Yeah. Sure.
I have one more thing. I don't know if this is going to be perfect to this, but is there a way to use Intune, if I said it's already, to find a way to lock down a better security like within the admin privilege?
Yep. Yep. That falls in line with the endpoint privilege management. So that's a popular topic.
Like, say you push out software from Intune, like maybe updating that software.
Yeah, we will cover that. There are a couple of ways to approach that. I do have a section in regards to that. I'm trying to keep the slides fairly simple, and I want to have this more discussion based so we can be a little bit more interactive, because it sounds like some of us have experience with Intune already. And there's, for those that are not all that familiar, there are a zillion different ways to slice every single thing you can do in here. So it's basically a holistic approach. The idea is to kind of replace on-prem AD and infrastructure and have a singular management platform and dashboard to kind of just manage everything in your environment. So that would have, I've converted clients that were on-prem AD only and fully migrated them just to Azure AD only. And in that process, you can get rid of tech debt that you've been carrying around for a long time. It gives you an opportunity to kind of go through your GPOs, figure out what you need and what might not be necessary anymore. Maybe get rid of some security vulnerabilities, such as old LDAP connectors for legacy applications, those sorts of things. I found it's not 100% all the time, and it's not even like super common, but I found a lot of clients are just really comfortable with Active Directory, and they're just really tied to that workflow. But once we actually break everything down, the big holdups I've actually gotten with most clients are VoIP, like Mitel, those sorts of things. And then that's the only thing that's actually reliant on on-prem AD. And it's more of a hassle to set up a hybrid scenario and do the hybrid Intune connector, because there are some limitations, such as device naming schemes and variables and those sorts of caveats that you run into with that. So in doing those sorts of transitions, we basically replicate the environment in Intune and Azure AD, because usually it'll be the environments will have AD Connect already set up. So you've already got your Azure AD environment fairly well replicated. I mean, you don't have to go create all new users and everything else. But once you migrate all of the GPOs and do all your auditing and get all your apps packaged and configuration profiles, compliance, dashboard set up, basically there's really no need for on-prem AD anymore, and you can just go and turn it off. So
in that scenario, we traditionally will only see like Azure AD directory services turned on in Azure for server workloads. When you've moved all of your workstations to Azure AD Join, and all of your servers either are PaaS or live in Azure AD with the directory services in Azure, then you really don't have the need for those physical roles, because it's just looking for some sort of directory service to authenticate to your users that live in Azure Active Directory. So gone are the days then are GPOs and FSMO roles and domain controllers, because it's just hosted as a service up in Azure for those few workloads, which even those are starting to decrease with SaaS apps and with PaaS applications that you can move into, like Azure SQL, etc.
And one thing I wanted to add too is generally if you're considering Intune in the first place, you're likely going to have Microsoft 365 licensing. It might not be necessarily the one that you need, but there are solutions such as EMS, endpoint management and security, which would include the Intune suite. We'll go through licensing in a little bit too. With AD Connect, if you have Office 365 or M365, it's generally a pretty straightforward transition, because when you factor in even with known folders, and if you have home drives replicating to file servers, for example, you can fairly easily transition over to OneDrive with known folder move policies with that too.
Or even SharePoint Mover to move off of file servers to uplift that data. So there's some tools that you can leverage within that Microsoft stack to help break some of those dependencies as well.
Excellent.
Do you have any favorite one-stop shop for self-education? If that is just Microsoft directly and some of the options.
That's a great one. Well, since
many hats that are working.
Everyone in the room familiar with MMS? So there's a lot of the management community around systems management is pretty rich. So there's tons of MVPs, tons of great bloggers. I'll touch on some of them as we start to talk about proactive remediation, because that's one great way. When you start to think about security and compliance, it's baselines, it's configurations on your device, and ensuring that those are always consistent. And that sometimes doesn't necessarily rely on, or it can be trusted by device policies or device configuration policies in Intune. So having that compliance arm in things like proactive remediations is a great way to bridge that gap. In SCCM, that was desired state configuration. But in looking at the community, there's a wealth of resources, and just wanted to give that as one example of where there's so much information in that community to be able to get up to speed. And Microsoft Learn really has gotten really rich in terms of breaking it down to how we would consume it, how we would implement it. It's not as dry as the old TechNet days. Absolutely.
Maybe some layer 8 stuff there too.
Right. How do you get them comfortable with it? What are some tools?
Say you have an Office 365 like cheap $4 exchange on my mailbox license. Are you able to use that if you have your own like Azure tenant to test with Intune? If you have your own AD Connect working in your own test home/lab environment?
What I've typically done in those scenarios is just a small contingent of licenses. Even if it's something like, I know E5 is pricey. It's like $65 a month for just one license, but that unlocks every feature outside the premium ones we'll talk about. Thanks, Microsoft, for adding more licensing. But usually having that one E5 just from testing will unlock a lot of capabilities that you would see and be able to leverage in the business world outside of those hybrid components that you're referring to. So that's when you'd have to have like a workstation or a server. You have your own lab. I love it. Yep, mine too.
So just to clarify, your current licensing is Exchange Plan 1 or 2, and that's what you have?
In my own personal house, yes, I have 2 licenses because I'm my own domain. AD Connect and
So with that, you won't have Intune unlocked. You won't have Azure Active Directory Premium unlocked or the security portal. So you would probably need to get a higher license to be able to have some of those features.
If I were in your shoes and I wanted to just dip my toes in and not get super invested and just wanted to get a feel for it, I would probably recommend starting out with EMS E3 because that'll give you a lot of the management capacities. And Azure AD Premium P1, I believe, is what that is, and I can't remember off the top of my head if that's included in.
It is.
It
Yep.
is. Oh,
Yep.
perfect. So then you don't need to get that additionally. So, business premium. It does.
Business Premium, I do have that, and I've recommended that to some people as well to be able to get that full stack. Now, there are some tiny limitations over the enterprise SKUs, but that unlocks all the features, especially Intune, Azure Active Directory Premium, even gets you into the Defender security stack, which we'll talk about too.
And the reason I generally tend to recommend EMS E3 is it's a very small amount more expensive than just the Intune license itself, and you get a fair bit more features, and I feel like it's a better value for money.
That's $27, I think, per month
Sure,
for
cheaper than what I'm paying for my VMware licenses, those licenses. So.
probably. Great topics. We'll try to make sure that I'll watch some of those questions as we get into some of those areas and revisit those. And if some of those spurn some extra questions, free to chime them out.
I'm gonna actually ask for a couple more topics. What current bottlenecks do you guys have that in your current environments that you would like to improve upon? I know we covered it.
Resources.
Humans? AI, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I'm at deployment and
Sure.
being able to onboard a new user computer and just ship it to them and you're good to go, and then using one single source and not use a WAS server to patch endpoint users and then be able to patch like other software as well.
Great. Anybody else?
I would say besides our local admin thing is the driver updates.
Driver updates.
Yeah,
Okay.
not necessarily application, but like, yeah. We switched from A2000.
Definitely. Anything else before we move on? Cool. All right. So the basic run through, I think we've kind of covered this briefly, but you have the enrollment for devices. We'll cover that. Configuration profiles. We're going to walk through the settings catalog, which kind of resembles more traditional on-prem GPO style policies. It's not 100% one-for-one because some of those policies aren't really applicable when it comes to Azure AD.
In modern managed devices more specifically. So some of the traditional settings that you'd see in GPOs, Microsoft's done a great job uplifting them in the settings catalog where applicable. Okay? And if you understand the concept of modern management, it's more IT hands-off and more self-service, which can be scary in some organizations to say, okay, I'm going to put some of that inherent trust in my end users, but that really is the story when it comes to modern management. It's simplify the deployment, simplify the life of IT, and not be, not have so many policies or configurations, but keep it very light on the configuration side when it comes to devices.
And then we'll walk through, again, we're just touching on basic topics here. Application packaging, there are a bunch of different ways to do that. We'll cover some of the update topics, what have you. Update management, that's going to be Windows update management. So to be patching rings, security updates, quality updates, upgrades from Windows 10 to 11, what have you. We'll have a focus on endpoint security as well. We'll go through compliance and reporting and proactive remediation.
Okay.
Excellent.
And then as part of this, we'll also cover some use cases that we've seen in the wild with customers, where we've heard some of their business goals really intersect with Intune. A lot of that really is around modern management, like easy deploy devices, being able to shorten that time, being able to really optimize on the staff that you have with tools at your disposal that come through Intune and having modern managed endpoints. And then we'll actually touch on licensing here in just a moment. And as we cover some of those business use cases, we'll also really dive into some of the business goals that we have seen with customers around the use of Intune.
Yep. And I think we've already kind of brought up some of these topics as well. So embrace cloud-centric endpoint management, covered opportunity to sunset on-prem AD with Azure AD only and Intune management, simplified dashboards, we'll walk through that. Unified source of truth for endpoints, so streamlining device management and consolidating into one platform versus many.
And the two key ones here that we hear a lot from customers is, I want better reporting, and there's a plethora of that that's available inside of Intune versus traditional SCCM. You had to be familiar with SSRS and building reports and knowing exactly what to tap into within the SCCM schema, and then it's just a whole lot easier inside of that Intune world. And being able to reduce footprints, being able to say there's no longer a dependency on a server, or with one customer that we're working with right now who is in the financial institution, they have distribution points at all of their branch locations. And when you're managing almost 100 different distribution points, even as a small device, there's still a lot of overhead in keeping those DPs up to date, making sure the hardware is consistent, when you can just upload that to the cloud. I think that's the biggest opportunity here, is how can we leverage the cloud? How can we leverage the licensing a lot of us are already paying for within M365 to our disposal?
And by reducing that hardware or even virtualized server licensing, what have you, you can save a lot of money with licensing that you either already have, or for actually a reduction when you factor in the whole licensing landscape with on-prem and Azure and M365 all taken into consideration. So
let's talk about licensing. One of my favorite topics. No, seriously, like all of you heard of the M365 Maps page?
That was what I was about to.
It's essentially almost the Bible when it comes to licensing, for being able to easily kind of have that 10,000-foot landscape of what comes in each of these different stacks. Really, the key thing that I like to drive home with customers when we start looking at the difference between E3 and E5 is automation around security and compliance. Those are the key areas that we'll see some of those additional value. I'm not saying it's going to be cheaper. In some cases, one of the things that we'll do with customers is kind of sit down and say, okay, here's all the features and functionalities that you get in M365, E3, and E5, but where inside of your environment may you actually be using other third-party tools, services, licensing, infrastructure, agents, you name it. That's something that will typically come in on the onset of looking at a modern management engagement to say, okay, you're paying this much for TeamViewer, and you're paying this much for third-party patching, and you're paying this much for remote help, and you just continue to layer those on over the course of a year times the number of licenses that you have. There's that opportunity for cost savings. And sometimes some of that isn't even necessarily in the endpoint management space. It's once you get into securing your environment more, and in certain industries where you have to be compliant, being able to automate some of those compliances in your data on your devices or in your Microsoft cloud.
And for those of you that might not have a view of the second monitor over there, this is that resource. It's m365maps.com. I really like the way that this breaks it down, and sometimes I find it easier and more streamlined than some of the Microsoft documentation, because you can select what you want to compare. So say I don't want these licenses and I just want to compare these specific ones to each other. It gives you the opportunity to break it down feature by feature. I'm not saying it's perfect, and it's generally kept pretty well up to date, but it gives a really good overview, frankly, and it's visually appealing and it's easy to follow.
And underneath of that, M365maps.com, this is the feature matrix. So you can select that feature matrix and then it will show you all of the different components that you can compare side by side.
And then when you go to that address here, this is what it'll look like off the bat. And then if you select a license, say E3, it'll present it in this format as well. So if it's a nice resource sometimes if you need to justify specific licensing to stakeholders and kind of give a nice visual, this is generally pretty helpful as well. So
and for a lot of customers that are still trying to make that journey, well, I think Microsoft over the last couple of years has really moved everyone into one of those M365 plans, but there are still customers that we see that they're still dealing with inner core CALs, enterprise CALs in their environment and traditional on-premises licensing. And so usually moving into Office 365 as well as EMS allows you to kind of meet those, enterprise CAL requirements, especially the big one that is up here on the screen is the Windows Server CAL, right? So by having that, it actually gives you not only the ability with EMS E3 to have that Windows Server CAL to be able to access for your users, but it also, if you did want to leverage on-premises Config Manager, this was the one that if you have this license, then you can actually leverage Config Manager too.
And generally, when I've worked with clients that are in a contract with that on-prem licensing, usually it's in 3-year increments, and generally you'll be somewhere along the way. And so what we'll do is we'll strategize when that that licensing ends, and then come up with a game plan to basically shift the architecture over time to achieve the goal, basically to be done by the time that licensing expires, and then just have everything ready to cut over and pick up when that's done. And then that's when you can see the immediate cost savings. And it also generally will give you time to shift that. And say you're going to expire in a month, then generally you would take, there are a couple of different approaches to look at that. I mean, every environment's different, but in that kind of case, if there's a really massive environment that's not going to be easy, lots of legacy apps, what have you, that are reliant on a ton of on-prem infrastructure, then we'll generally try and renew for another 3 years and then go through a plan to shift over those next 3 years. And it's a little bit easier to justify too, so then you don't have to spend a ton of money up front, and it gives you time to get some of the other projects you might already have going, like shifting over legacy apps to more modern cloud-based applications, and reevaluate your licensing across all of your environment, not just Microsoft. And yeah, Intune ties into it and all of it. I mean, this is all huge.
So with each of these different licensings, these all come with Intune Plan 1. So wanted to make that clear. That's the component that you see that gives you access to manage your devices. The very core components that we're used to seeing, if you're using Intune today, you're familiar with those capabilities. Now, where Microsoft has started to dip their feet into these additional premium licenses, this is where we start to look at the premium SKUs. So this is where it gets interesting. So with Plan 2 comes with the specialty device management. It gives you some more device analytics, and it includes tunnel. So I'm not going to go into the weeds too much on those two products today, but I just wanted to make mention that if you do have a business need for connectivity of your applications through mobile, tunnel is going to be that one license that you'd want to consider. That's part of Plan 2. And we'll touch on specialty device management in just a moment, but the one that's really gotten a lot of buzz is the Intune suite. So if you look at those licenses, if you were to get them individually, so Plan 1, if you didn't have EMS, would be $8 a month. Plan 2 is $4 a month, but if you were to do this suite, it's $10 a month. So you get a little bit of savings, and you actually get the features of the advanced endpoint analytics, the endpoint privilege management, which there's definitely a lot of buzz of today, and then the remote help capabilities. So those are the ones that would come into the suite. Now, if you just said, we want to do endpoint privilege management, you can add that on for $350 a month. You don't have to add on plan 2 to your licensing. Or if you wanted to do remote help, which has caused a lot of uproar, and there's a little bit of a, I want to say, gray area around that. So, you know, Microsoft, I think, is still trying to clear up how they're going to leverage remote help long term, moving away from quick assist. Does it need to be licensed per user? Does it need to be licensed per admin? You know, there's a couple of different sources that have varying information on how that particular feature is leveraged. As it came out of preview when it was free, everyone really loved it, and then Microsoft said you need to pay for every user. So then in that case, using third-party tools that allow you to do more out-of-band versus just-in-time support for your end users has been a little bit of an uproar in the community. So with the remote help right now, as one of those features, it is user-attended support. So you can initiate that support through the Intune portal. You can leverage a configuration policy to allow that device to be able to do the remote support, but to be able to do some of that, you know, third-party out-of-band features and functionality does not exist today. So
If you have E5, you don't have it. If you just have
you don't have it with E5,
And this is why we have E5 and this for today.
Yeah, for today's demo, we actually have E5 and the Intune suite. So with that Intune suite, it would give us all the capabilities for tunnel. So the specialty device management, and this is, you know, something that maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but when you start to look at devices like HoloLens, Teams Rooms, to be able to do over and above management of some of those devices the same way you could with your PCs, Microsoft is saying you would get the Intune Plan 1 that comes with, I think, the Teams Room license, and then the specialty management gives you over and above license, over and above management for those devices, HoloLens, etc. Outside of that, as I mentioned, Plan 2 with Tunnel, and then getting into really some of the capabilities for like the advanced endpoint analytics. So it allows you to dig in a little bit deeper to monitor the health of the device over and above what you would see inside of your traditional reporting inside of Intune. And it gives you an enhanced device timeline. So slightly better reporting is what comes with that. We touched on remote help, but then the biggest piece that we see customers really starting to consider within either getting the add-on for endpoint privilege management or getting the Intune suite is really going to be around, you know, those use cases for endpoint privilege management. Are there applications in the environment that require users to actually run as administrator? Over the last, I'd say 5 years, that number has dropped, but they still exist in the environment. A lot of organizations, they've shifted to SaaS applications so they can run their core business apps in the cloud and have been able to remove a lot of that elevated needed for access in their environment. So I know we had a couple of use cases where we looked at privilege management on the workstations. Is that to run specific apps, or is that to do administration?
well, for us, like, the user sometimes has to download special software.
So that is for an application itself. Okay. Is that a specialty line of business application, or is it like a off-the-shelf type of app?
A lot of times it's off the shelf.
And are they one-offs, or are there like a group of users?
One-offs.
Okay.
Okay.
We have some programmers who are do updates on their software they already have installed. So would that be?
So that's really the driving question behind why I asked that is, do they just need to elevate their rights because they're doing a litany of tasks one time, or is it because they need to run this one particular application over and over and over again?
On the simple side of this, if you have a group of users, which is why I asked that have a specific set of apps, say like accounting needs QuickBooks, but nobody else does, and it's just a small handful of users, but they all need that, and you'd like to assign it to a group and not have to install it manually and reduce that overhead.
Or give them the device administrator role in that case. Yeah.
Well, and what I would do in that case is I would actually package and upload that into Intune and then deploy it that way if you're going to leverage Intune for this.
Right. And then there's some also like time zone. Windows 11, you gotta be a local admin. There's something with the time that our users can local admin. There's other things on the device where they have to be a local admin.
And are they in one geographic location, or are they spread out?
We're all over.
Okay, so this is where this is always it's kind of difficult because it's going to be one of those things where you'll have a policy and settings catalog, and there'll have to be some sort of breakdown by geographic location based on groups, and then you would assign that policy with that particular time zone to that group for each location.
Right.
So that that solution's a little easier for smaller organizations. It just gets a little more dicey when you start having like 6-7 time zones and then having to assign policies to each. But then you can also tie those to, say, printers for office locations, and then that's where you would address that. So this is the kind of thing where you might want to, you get a good opportunity to reevaluate the way that you deploy your GPOs and printers and
Or applications and kind of who has access to them.
Yeah.
For the privilege management, the key target user for these is going to be apps, and being able to say, okay, here's an executable that I need to allow this person to run, and it has this file hash. We'll take a little bit deeper look at that when we get into that
So
endpoint
it's not
security.
necessarily give them.
It's not administration. This
Okay.
is more of, I need to run an app, and I don't want to give someone that administrative level of access on the machine. I can say, this particular app, they can run it and they can make that change. So
Right. Okay.
Does this have something? Help desk to do something, give them that particular access to it.
So we'll dig into that within the privilege management piece, because there's some specific criteria around like how you can activate it and the certain settings around that. And a lot of it does revolve around apps and application management.
Apps that just like update as you see prompt as well.
That's a perfect example, right? If there's an app that occasionally or even reliably will throw the UAC prompt up for users instead of giving them the ability to enter a credential, or if you have local admin rights, that would be the scenario where this would be a perfect fit.
Well, like Adobe updates.
Adobe would probably be one too, right? You know, if you have that updaters a hash and you can put that in there, and then when that runs, then they can put in the justification, or you can actually just have them put in their credentials. You don't even have to add in justification, but you can bypass that.
And there's a really cool new feature with the new Windows Store that's WinRM based. If you have cloud-based Adobe, now you can push Creative Cloud and Adobe Reader through that, and it will update through the Windows Store natively. So you don't have to mess with the transform
packaging.
files and all of that. So you block the Windows Store.
Well, in this case, it would be the company portal. Do you allow the company portal? Okay, so then that should be fine too. You can allow them to self-service to install the app, and then from then on out, because that app is tied into the Microsoft Store, not necessarily opening up the app itself, but just the endpoints in the Microsoft Cloud to be able to just string those down.
And also, we can dive into this because I'm not sure with the WinRM deployments if it does show up in the company portal, but I believe there is a policy that you can unblock certain apps and you won't allow any others. So that would be how you wouldn't block the entire store, because there are other parts of Intune and Autopilot that do rely on some of that back end to provision stuff. So you could limit it, but
WinGet, the WinGet.
Microsoft Store option.
Mhm.
App deployment
Yep.
allows you to list it.
oh, it does. Okay.
Yep.
The new one. None
Correct.
of the old ones. The 8 other iterations.
Should we dive into enrollment?
Sure.
One more quick question on the admin thing. So as I said before, right now we're just doing the Azure Active Directory role. Then I assign them the
Yep.
Azure local
And then
device.
they check it in, check it out.
So we're in a hybrid. We're about to go fully Azure Active Directory. We're not there yet, but we can't do the eligible where they can do it themselves.
Yep. So we have customers that are transitioning to Azure AD Join just so they can use PIM.
So that could be because we're still in hybrid that we can't do eligible. Like we can
Yeah.
still assign them.
Correct. Yeah.
Manually, but they can't.
Correct. Yeah. It has to be Azure AD Joined for those devices.
Because the way that it does that authentication is when you're Azure AD versus hybrid, the IDP goes through on-prem AD, and when you're Azure AD, it uses Azure or Azure AD as the IDP. So then that's how it can actually regulate that.
Yep. So I don't know if you ever dug underneath the hood in an Azure AD Join machine, but if you look under your administrative groups, you've got these weird looking ones with SIDs, and those are the Azure AD Join device administrator groups. You just can't see them because of how it can't necessarily talk to that directory to get them. But if you look up those SIDs, those are exactly what they are. And so I've had scenarios where customers have cleared those out, and then they can't use that role until they actually put that SID back in.
You don't know what it is.
That's right. It looks weird. It looks weird. I don't trust it.
At first we made it so we made like a group, and then we would just add users to that group. Not the Azure group. I forget how we did it, but then all of a sudden there was local admins on everything.
Yeah. Right. Device users or domain users were all administrators, the traditional adage. Right. Let's talk a little bit through the enrollment process inside of the Intune portal.
So since our primary focus today is Windows, because obviously there's a lot to talk about and we don't want to run too far over, but we want to get as much as we can, and we'll go and just cover this for right now because iOS and Mac devices and Android devices are their own can of worms and have a bunch of other caveats like Apple
Box,
Business
not
Manager.
can, box.
So let's see. All right. So I already configured the enrollment policies for this. So this one we aren't going to do live, as I mentioned earlier. So basically what you'll do is you'll find that by default, a tenant will come with both of these set to all. So some of you may have seen in your Azure AD, if you go under devices, if you've never configured this before, a lot of machines will be Azure AD registered, and some of them might even be Azure AD joined by a user signing in and allowing the organization to manage your device. Like if you sign into Office, you get that little checkbox. That's pretty much what facilitates that flow. That's how that happens. And if you're going to start building out this environment with the intent on eventually deploying it, going through pilot waves, or building, testing, what have you, you'll want to limit it to groups. So I have both of these set to some. We are using 2 groups today for this demo. Our user is so creative, it's called demo user. Sure. Oh, sure.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so I have two groups. I have a user group and a device group, and the device has been put in the device group after being enrolled, and then the user has been put in the user group after it's been enrolled. I did these manually because there are a couple of other things in this tenant, and I didn't want to contaminate them with what we're going to do here, and just limit the scope to these this user and this device essentially. And so with that being said, this is how I would go through it when I'm staging a pilot for a client. So that way we're not interfering with their active environment, and end users don't accidentally have something change without any notice or whatever, if you know.
Versus having it set to all.
Yeah.
So
So
is what you'll find out of the box.
so
then
that
that
is,
allows anyone to enroll any device.
yep. And it's generally good practice as well to make sure that you clean those devices up. And if you don't want to clean them up or remove them, that's why you create groups specifically for this. And then as you're going to roll this out, then you migrate them over to these groups. So they're just not affected at all. So basically the scope of this is the Intune devices and Intune users group. Let's see. Let's go through. One of the big ones that I like is the enrollment status page. It's a little bit misleading because it just sounds like a status page, and this is part of autopilot. So if you leave it on the default setting, it basically won't show any progress. It won't tell you how far it is in the provisioning process. And so it's a lot harder to trace down issues, especially when you're validating any policies that you've configured and are testing, especially when you're packaging applications manually, which we'll get into later. It'll give you an idea. I usually like to package applications one by one and assign them one by one. So that way you don't do it all at once and then you roll it out all at once and then it gets hung up on an app and then you have to like go back and try and figure it out. This screen is really nice. So I'll create a profile. Baseline enrollment status page. Oops. And then show app and profile configuration. So you can set a timeout of, by default it's 60 minutes, but if you have, say, an app that, if you have a sequence of apps that are larger installs like AutoCAD or things like that, you can extend this so you're not locked into that 60-minute time frame. However, if you're only installing an application that you know only takes 10 minutes, and honestly, this won't even affect you if it doesn't error out. But basically, this gives you a little bit of time for it to wait something out if it's going to take a longer amount of time. Well, it's kind of self-descriptive. Let's see. Show custom message when the time limit or error occurs. So generally, this is what you would have set once you put it into deployment, and this is what an end user would see once they go through the autopilot sequence. The way that an end user, if they got the computer and how this would affect them, say a manufacturer has already pre-enrolled the devices into your tenant, you can set them up with vendors. I won't get too far into that right this second. The vendor ships it directly to a work from home user. They sign in with their organization credentials. They'll be scoped for this, and say an application fails on that particular machine, it will give them this message instead of them just not having the software and then them not reporting it. So that's where that could be advantageous in testing. I'll generally just put that to no or leave it on. It doesn't really matter. Turn on log collection and diagnostics page for end users. Yes, that'll give an option to download a file. That'll basically just be a report of the current device event viewer log.
Is everyone familiar, if you've been in SCCM for a while, familiar with the out-of-box experience where you can do Shift F10 to get the command prompt up? There's actually a really good PowerShell module as long as you've got internet connectivity. It's, I think, get Windows Autopilot Diagnostics that you can run, and it has like a nice little ASCII graphical interface that shows you where some of those failed. I found that actually tends to be more informative going through that. It's probably, if you get to an error message and you pull up that command prompt and run that command, it probably will take you 2 minutes for it to do the collection versus trying to take those log files, move it onto another drive, move it onto the network, somehow get it to another machine and be able to look through. So the collection of diagnostics is great, but you're looking for an easy way to do it right on the fly. That's a much better way to do it.
Well, and then now they have a new feature as well. If the device has gotten far enough in the enrollment process, you can go to this device diagnostics here, and
I guess it's failed, right? I think you have to do the collect diagnostics on the main page over on on the overview page for that device. There's a button at the top.
Oh, collect diagnostics.
You can click that button. It'll ping the device. It'll pull down the collection diagnostic package and then have it available for you inside the portal to download. So that's been a nice enhancement where you don't have to try to shift log files around.
And so when you do run a collect diagnostics thing like this, it'll basically force a sync with the computer, and then it'll wait to sync, and then it'll upload, and then that's where you get it. Let's see, I know you just said the same thing. And then only show page to devices provisioned by out-of-box experience. I would generally click no, especially if you're doing it in waves and you are going to enroll devices that are already in production with end users. There are a couple ways to approach this. If you don't want to have a whole IT hands-on scenario where you touch every machine and do all of this, or want to wipe and do all the imaging and everything, there's a pretty convenient way actually to enroll a device. I think my computer's already, well, my computer's already enrolled, but if you go into the email and accounts under add work or school account. Okay, I don't have the option because I'm already enrolled. But you'll have two boxes at the bottom, and it'll give you join to Azure AD or register with Azure AD. And with these policies that we're configuring right now, if you click join to Azure AD only, if you have the device status page show up, as soon as they do that, then they'll still get that list of that process. So it'll basically just go through, everything's configuring, the applications are downloading, and what have you. And then generally I'll turn on allow users to reset device if installation error occurs, because if it fails, then there's nothing they can do, and then they'll have to send it back to you, or you'll have to collect the diagnostics and go into the portal and wipe it remotely if it's provisioned far enough to get that capability. With hitting yes, they get a reset button if it fails. Allow users to use device if installation error occurs. I generally do no in deployment, but yes when I'm doing validation. So that way, if something fails, I can actually go look at the machine. It'll let you continue beyond that page.
You can get to the desktop.
And then you can go see what happened, basically.
There's nothing worse than when that's set to no, and then you're stuck in this cycle of, okay, if I reset this 4 more times, will it start working?
And then block device use until required apps are installed if they are assigned to the user and device. The way that you assign applications is they're optional. They can be made available in the company store. You can set them to uninstall, and then you can force them to be installed on any machine. So say you have like Adobe Reader, for example. You can force that to be installed, and this will fail if it doesn't install. Or it won't let the user proceed beyond it installing. So that way they don't get in and then call in and submit a help desk ticket. Oh, well, I don't have all these apps while they're still provisioning, and then just creates noisy tickets.
The one common setting I'm usually seeing here for customers is Office. It's Office Suite M365 apps. So that way you know that the device has that, because it's typically the biggest package to download and install. So you can say, hey, we want to make sure that this user can use the device if something happens, but we want to make sure that Office is installed first. At least they get to the desktop, Office is there, and then you can troubleshoot the rest of the experience.
And generally, I will assign this particular profile to devices and users, since applications for that specific one, for this specific profile, can have applications deployed to both. So some applications are installed device-wide, and some are installed for the individual users. So if you want it, if you run into an issue when you're configuring this and it's like, well, it still didn't install this, but it still let them go in anyway, it's probably because you're either missing a device or a user.
You need to do multiple profiles, like where it's like the security tool set, right? You don't get access to the desktop, but you assign Office, then Office, if it fails to install, you get access.
You can create multiple enrollment status pages, sure.
I mean, you could get as granular as you want with it. It could be just like GPOs and assigning them just how you would on-prem. So you could just make however many groups you want, and then as many policies as you want, and assign them to each group. And yeah.
That's usually where it's helpful when you start to flesh out your use cases, when you're starting to do autopilot. It's like, okay, you know, I've got these 8 personas, and then I know within each of these, they all have Office, check. Maybe these people need to have an app before they get to the desktop. And then these other need to have an app, you can do a different enrollment status pages for that.
However, you can't set multiple per user
Right.
or device.
Yes, it can only be one per user.
Oh, so that's okay.
Oh,
Our testing are running a long time. Security stack, right? Pretty small.
no.
Well, and so
How do you interesting. Install the security stack, give them access to the desktop, but it doesn't have to go to company portal to choose the office, right? It would install in the background.
so for that particular ask, you would change it from all to selected here, and then it gives you the opportunity to select any apps that you want in that list, and then you just wouldn't put any in this list. We don't have any apps packaged yet, so that's why they're none showing up, but you would get your list of packaged applications here, or ready to deploy applications if you're getting it from or the store, what have you. But yeah, so to answer your question, any apps that you want to force to install and not let it proceed, you would select those, and then say Office takes a long time, you would just not select that, and then that would give you the constraint I think you're looking for.
Your software office isn't installing automatically.
Right.
So it's like,
Well, it should still install automatically. It just, yeah, it'll install in the background. So if you have it set to required, it will still install. It just won't hang up on the status page.
I've
Yeah.
usually seen customers where they'll do like security tool sets. Some of them will have third-party ones. They'll put it in here, and then things like Office that'll just install after the fact, right? So if at least you can get through the security apps install, can get to the desktop, versus saying right now, if we had it set to all, then any assigned application to that user or device would have to be installed before it got to the desktop. And for some users, it could be a lot of applications, especially if you use Patch My PC, because then usually it'll do all the application updates, and it has to process through those, and that can really hang up the build process,
So
which
that
we've seen.
setting up there where it says like 4 up, where it says block device, is that just turning on the?
That would essentially be, if we set this to no, then you would be
You can-
able to get to the desktop. Right now, it's set to yes. So we'd have to have all the apps installed that are assigned to that device or that user before it got to the desktop.
And that goes back to what I was saying
Testing.
earlier. Well, for testing, it's really helpful. Well, for testing, I guess it doesn't matter so much, but it eliminates a lot of the user gets the device and they sign in and provision it themselves, and it's not quite ready yet because it's still provisioning, but they've clicked through it, and then they're like, oh, well, I need all these apps, and then they rush to put in a ticket before they have it. I'm just using that as an example.
So
But
if you had a selected app under there, it's gonna take, so it has to have them all the way you have the settings.
yeah, so if you do selected, it'll be all, that could be,
Because that's,
Yeah,
it would
it's
be
kind of-
selected,
kind
even
of
though the wordings.
conflicting with each other. So
Yep.
knowing which ones can impact the others is very important when it comes to the enrollment status page. If you start to customize it, if you just leave it set to the defaults, then
So it'd be all selected apps, whether it be all or selected. Yeah. And like I said, I'm assigning it to both devices and users. I'm not leveraging scope tags at the moment.
This is a scenario for like.
This is a scenario. This is a scenario for Azure AD, and
Because I'm just thinking from like.
any
you're
auto,
saying the device.
correct.
Sure.
So they would have to be listed in the devices, correct?
yeah,
In
so
Intune. So
you-
they have to be enrolled either manually or through GPO or through autopilot, so that this status page would show for any of those device personas.
so this is the one we.
So now that we've set up that baseline, that one's going to take priority over the Microsoft default, which will always be the lowest in the list.
Can you actually move this one
No.
up? Okay.
Nope, because it's
If
you
you
have to remove it.
But if you do have multiple policies configured for different sets of users, you can also set different priority levels for those as well. All right. Let's see.
Profile.
So since I already deployed autopilot to this machine, I already have this profile created. So I'll go, actually, you know what? I want to go through the other one. I already have this one existing. See, and then, so one thing that, if you're going to just use Intune only and you don't want to use autopilot and you don't want the machines to provision
into autopilot.
You would leave that as no. But in this case, we have it selected as yes. So when we enroll it into autopilot, it goes through the entire enrollment sequence and gives you all the abilities of autopilot.
One caveat here is if you create a deployment profile and you have it set to yes and you have it targeted to all your devices, then all your devices will enroll into autopilot, which can be good, but it also can be very bad.
It won't automatically wipe a machine, but the next time you go and reset it, it will go through that autopilot process, whether you're intending it to or not. So
Yeah.
that's where you want to be careful with it. And it can be.
It can be if it's planned. We've seen some customers turn it on and like some things happen and then it actually ends up being really bad. And we've worked through a couple of those.
Like we purchased ours through Dell and they came already pre-figured for autopilot.
Yep, and then they're not targeted yet though.
Right, that's the difference.
So you would add them to the group that would fall under the assignments for this profile, and then that's how you would do it. And then to your point about staging them, if you're going to stage the devices and you want to use that as a migration tactic, when you're in the staging phase after all of your validation testing and you've made sure everything's going to work and you're going to roll it out by waves, for example, you would set it to that wave for that wave only. I wouldn't really extend it out too long. Like I would do it close enough to where the device will get the policy, but just in case a user hits reset or something, I mean, I'm not going to say anything doesn't have it because we've all seen
Some
stuff. So I would allow yourself enough time, but I wouldn't let it sit there for months, for example.
If you do this, just be careful what you're targeting it to. Don't go all devices, which you can do. Make sure you're targeting it to a specific group of devices in it.
And especially with the policy I've set here, because it's not the preview feature, I like self-deploying once machines are already enrolled, but I'll go into that in just a moment. User-driven will basically look like a standard out-of-box the first time the device is enrolled. So what'll happen is you'll do an autopilot reset once the device is converted to autopilot and enrolled in Intune, and that's how you would initiate that migration process. And then the machine will come up in out-of-box, and then it will prompt you, it'll basically prompt for you to sign in with your company email, and then it'll initiate that sequence that we just talked about. After this basically just goes through the out-of-box experience customization. So in this case, we're doing Azure AD joined. Hybrid Azure AD joined has some limitations. I'm not going to go too far into this because we don't have the time or the.
That's a whole other session of itself.
Yep.
And even Microsoft recognized how they introduced this to work with specific customers, but in the broader scope of things, it's not a good approach.
They actually recommend
not
going straight to Azure AD if at all possible. Sure. And it does work in certain scenarios, but it adds a level of complexity to it.
Everybody's like, why are there 2 devices in Azure? I'm like, normal.
Yeah.
Sure. But for today's, we don't have a server set up, we don't have a DC and all that for right now. So
it's
yes.
Especially if you don't have a good VPN. Yeah.
No, it will not. And that's where the hybrid connector.
In that use case for hybrid, it works well, but
in this use case, we're basically starting either from scratch or we're planning on going cloud-centric only. So it'll be basically migrating your GPOs to configuration profiles, which we'll get to.
Yeah, this is a great approach to really move if you're doing process of getting devices into Intune off of ConfigMan through like a reset or a replacement. This is the best scenario, but if you're doing builds, this is the best scenario as well. So even if you have hybrid in your environment, I probably wouldn't implore doing this and looking at autopilot with hybrid, unless you're deploying all your devices, you're white gloving them all, and you're doing it all from on-prem. But then in that scenario, it's a good way to get it into Intune. It's a good way to get it into autopilot and still have it hybrid join. But you know, the
Your hybrid follower system, they can set off.
which technically that technically is not considered the modern managed approach.
No, I wanted to go. They're like, oh, I'm a well, it works now.
Sure. It's a paradigm shift. You have to.
Anybody thinks about going hybrid autopilot? I would say no. Try to avoid it.
Word from the wise.
And then, so just standard out of box settings that can be skipped. You can select the way that you want the user provisions. You can set the users as administrator or standard. For testing purposes, I like to, when I'm doing validation, I like to set it as administrator because it gives you the administrative rights. And then when you're going to deploy it to end users, you would want to set it to standard if you're going to leverage some of the security features that we'll cover later. And we kind of dove into a little bit. Pre-provisioned deployment is if you're going to have a hands-on with each device, basically. And it's kind of nice. It's Windows key 5 times, you get to the, you basically get to
the out-of-box experience.
To the out-of-box experience, and it'll basically, if the device is already pre-enrolled from a manufacturer, it should just automatically provision all of the standard baseline stuff that's not user applicable, but across every machine. And then if you don't have it from a manufacturer and you're doing this with an existing device, that you might just want to have pre-provisioned with all the baseline stuff, but hasn't been assigned to a user yet. And you want to set it on the shelf.
If they have that crapware on their Windows image on the hidden partition, no. That's when you'd probably have to have a script after the fact or completely wipe all the disk partitions and reinstall Windows.
And if you have problems with particular pieces of software, that's where I've had to leverage packaging applications and then forcing them to uninstall. So that's how you could handle it in one way.
There's some cool Apex scripts out there too that you can even add in as a proactive remediation that always make sure that they're not installed or not enabled.
So if they try and reinstall themselves, basically, it'll just take care of it. Mm-hmm. Yep. So pre-provisioned deployment, though, basically for hot spares, you'll have something called a device enrollment manager, which with a standard Office license, you're only allotted 5 devices, so you'll run out of those pretty quickly if you're using the same account to sign in. So basically that lifts that restriction for...
Allows you 1,000 enrollments per user count. So yeah, I've had customers where they'll have one deployment manager account that has the E3 license or Intune license, so they can pre-build those machines into Azure AD Join. And then they'll hand it off to the user, they'll go into Intune, they'll change who it's assigned to.
You don't even necessarily need to do that either. If you don't do that, that is one way to do it if you don't want the user to have any hands-on with it. If you want to just be able to give it to the user without having that other piece of administrative overhead, and you can hand it to the user, and then it'll basically give them the out-of-box, and then it says welcome to organization, and then they just sign in with their email as they normally would. And then it'll go through that provisioning process that we just went through as well. So those are the 2 options.
Touch on the bottom one, let's move forward.
What was that? Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Bottom one.
The bottom one.
The naming.
Oh, naming templates. This one's really nice.
This is where we typically see customers build out multiple profiles based on geographical regions or offices when they're deploying, because then you can say, or even device types, right? We could say, this particular deployment profile is going to go on desktops that are in South America. So you would have like Brazil-P or D for a desktop, and then the serial number after it. So this allows you to enroll those devices based off of those naming templates.
And this is also a really good example of a limitation you get when you select hybrid. you can't do this at all. And then on,
You can set up a device configuration profile to do it, but then you have to, and then there's the whole hybrid process.
yeah, which is why we're not getting into that right now. All right, so next is just assignments, and I already have a policy set up for this. So
For the naming scheme, yeah.
For the naming scheme, it's user department possible. So I've got apps that include you.
If you
Human resources department and my finance department specifically. So I like name them appropriately.
you can do that with those profiles. The nice thing about Azure AD Join is you can actually rename it on the fly before you hand it off to them. You can't do that with hybrid. Once it's built with hybrid, you can't change the name. You have to remove it and clean it out. But Azure AD Join, yeah, once it's enrolled, even if it was demo, for example, the desktop, you can rename it right now, and then what would happen is on the next check-in, it will actually, or actually even on the next reboot, it will change the name of the device.
well, so if
If
that
you're
point,
burdened by, I like to use the term burdened because a lot of organizations think, okay, we need to name a device by a person or a department versus saying, okay, let's just get the serial number, right? The device serial number stays with the device as long as you don't pull the hard drive out and change it into another piece of hardware. So why does it matter if the device is named by who has it or where it's located or what department it is? So that's been a big paradigm shift. Probably the biggest one with customers is having them realize you don't need to give your computers fancy names. Just give it an abbreviation and then a serial number and then. Yep, you can do the correct. Or you could, in some cases, you just create groups inside of Intune and just drop them in there and do that as a way of being able to logically manage them. Since you can't really, as we talked about, add a description title to a device inside of Azure AD.
and so in this particular case too, with the restart, with the rename, if you don't want to impact users and you don't need the name updated immediately, but you want it to do that next time the user restarts and the device checks in, you would select no. You can also select yes, and then the device it'll give you a toast and it'll say your device is requested to reboot by your organization. I believe it's 60 minutes. And then it'll be like save your work or whatever, and then it'll reboot it and then rename it. And then when it comes back up, it should rename the device, but then it still has to check in first. So it won't get it until it checks in. You can force a sync. And then next time this computer checks in and it forces a reboot, it will reflect here once it's checked in, once the reboot confirmed, or once it's checked in and confirmed that the name has been set after the reboot. All right. Oops.
We just did that recently.
Was it?
It was already, he's already been using it. We went to rename it.
Was it hybrid joined?
No.
Oh, it was.
We changed it, but it messed up his file stuff. For some applications.
Oh, so application specific issue. Sure, sure.
All right. I think
We touched through.
Oh, one thing I want to, this isn't really a deployment profile, but to confirm a device has been enrolled, it will show up here with a serial number. If a manufacturer will put the machine in for you, you'll usually end up with a purchase order number here, and you can create dynamic groups based on that, for example. So if you want one batch of computers, you replace all of them at once, and you want to stage that particular group if they're going to like a particular department, what have you. That's a nice way to make those dynamic groups and automate some of that. And this will give you information, and it'll show you both the associated Intune device, which will be in the Intune devices list, and the Azure AD device, which is the device object that lives in Azure AD.
To be able to have them dump the hardware hash in there for you. I think there might be a page. I know there's the big five or whatever they call them that do that. Outside of that, there's certain the device enrollment profile, having an automatically enrolled devices, even if it's not a big vendor like a Dell or an HP, if it's like a MSI or some other, even white box. You can have that deployment profile point into those if you've got that group set up. Or you can do the enrollment manually through control panel, or you can do it even out of the out-of-box experience using Shift F10. There's like 3 or 4 commands you can run to have it automatically do the autopilot enrollment right out of the box without it getting to the desktop and then having to go through autopilot.
And then I believe we had configuration profiles next.
Trying to magnifications. There we go. Yep. So deployment profiles. Yep.
Deployment profiles. Oh, yep, we got that.
Yep. So yeah, I think that was everything within autopilot. So we kind of walk through that process. For the sake of time, we're not going to walk through an autopilot reset, but if you would like to see one afterwards while we're waiting we're doing the wrap up, we're happy to show you through it. It would take up almost
This one's actually
half
been
the
pretty
session.
quick,
So let's dig into configuration profiles. Actually, before we do that, let's take a quick 5-minute bio. Is that okay, everyone? Give you a chance to stretch your legs, and then we'll jump right into Windows configuration profiles.
Sure.
You said the E3 license, the M3 license was one you recommend since I already have a
EMS.
EMS.
Yep, just to mess around. If I were to recommend a license, it's gonna, if you just want that,
It's like
to test with,
$11 a month MSRP.
and then if you
Would
want,
that give you the whole suite, or what?
if you want
the
the-
whole suite?
it'll give you the Intune and security functionality that would be needed to basically walk through a lot of what we're covering today. If you want the whole Office suite, I would recommend M3 in
All
this
the Apex
scenario. So
packages.
then or M365
I remember that
E3,
script,
because
yeah.
then you'll get your Windows licensing, EMS E3, and the Office functionality. But that can be a little
So
bit
you can do
pricier.
that
I
if
don't
you
remember
know,
the price
like
of that right off the top of my
the
head,
big
but I believe it's somewhere
demo
around
or
like
the big presentation I like to do with Intune to show that is the Xbox game bar. So you can add it
don't
as an
quote me on
app
this,
and
I
then
think
go
it's
and
somewhere
add
around
it
like
as an
$50.
unroll.
Okay.
So then it'll automatically
So you-
remove it out of
You
the box.
explicitly call it out, so it's
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's some really
Um,
obnoxious ones, which
there are
minimize
different
the
pricing
number of
points.
really
Yeah, it's a lot.
obnoxious
It's-
ones.
it's
There-
better.
There are
It's
different
better than
price
it
points
was.
too, based on whether you do
Yeah.
it yearly
I mean, I
or
don't know if
monthly too. I think the monthly's a little more expensive.
Have like,
So
it wouldn't be
Yeah, I have-
technically installed, but
right
there'd be
now I
like
have
a
shim.
installer for like
App
Candy
shim.
Crush and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which I was like, you gotta be
Yeah.
kidding me.
It was
Microsoft
a web link web store to download it.
Yeah, and there's
Oh.
stuff, it seems like it's installed, but you click on it and it's like installing, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think the script is nice.
So do you have
Also
DCs
the
then
same
as well
set
and like
of
the whole
devices
shebang?
set
Okay.
on-
Oh man,
Yep.
yeah, that was fun.
No.
That
We had to do that for Momentum because I had like 16 other computers in my office at one point, and my
Okay.
room was like 3 days.
Was it winter or was it summer?
No, I think
I wanted to
Where
like,
the
get a
Momentum
computer and have
is
it.
summer, I was
AD
wearing
AD
it was
join,
hot out.
Mhm.
That's funny because last
work on, see how that all works.
spring they bought a
Your
company and then we
or
helped
your
them
organization then
polish
are
their
you guys
autopilot
fully
process. So
on-prem?
then,
The one we
Well,
were
this is my
like,
house.
Well, no, but when you go to your
yeah,
boss to
on
present
top of
this,
that, they're like
what
we
environment
made
is
that
that?
process better,
AD Connect
and they
on-prem
wiped
only.
all the devices
right?
in the company they acquired.
So all the devices are
which was
managed
actually
on
I'm glad they did that
on-premise
to build the
with
crap
just
up.
with no hybrid
because they
and
gave
no
me 3
Intune
different models
setup.
of laptop.
No, some of the devices are you
To
actually.
Trying
build
to
to build the
set different
autopilot
profiles.
profiles. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
someone tried to add them
I still have in my
into
tenant, I think I still have some of your test groups and stuff.
Well, so that goes back to what I was saying a little bit
Some
earlier
test
about
profiles.
the devices.
Every now and then I'm like,
if you allow the company
Yeah,
to manage
we're,
your organization to manage your
we're entering
devices,
early stages of getting all
and
our
it's still set to all enrollment. In certain scenarios
no
where
kidding.
someone's
Well,
done
not
anything in that
enrolled.
environment, it will.
part of it is that
which I know a lot of IT people have. That'll be where it'll have been registered,
projects
and that's why I
installed
have
Sure.
the groups separated out.
A lot
so
of
in those
companies,
cases,
unfortunately, they
you don't
built
have
that
to like
patch.
remove the devices or delete them or affect them if you're validating and testing, and you only
What is
affect those
it?
groups.
It's
Does that kind of does that
June?
fall a little? Yeah.
For me, I want to understand this technology.
Yep.
first, because again,
The
this
new
is the way the
132
company
app.
wants to go.
Sure. So
Yeah.
Have you seen deployment
How it
issues
works
there where
with one
you
of the processes
selected
like
apps,
that,
some of them
and
install
testing the whole
successfully, some of
environment, I
them
break
just
some,
I have.
never installed?
Sure.
I have, yeah.
And once
Just
they
bug
get
store still?
Yeah,
It's
well, I
still-
mean, they have it as a preview and then, you know, Microsoft will do a preview for
a couple of years, right?
Oh my God.
So that kind of stuff. Can
And then
be done
everyone,
wave to wave.
and then everyone blogs about it, and everyone starts using it, and it's like kind of 3/4 baked. Or maybe it's just some.
When it does want to go, the new store is real sweet.
It's so easy. Yeah.
There are workarounds for some of those things. So you can still get away with not having the hybrid connector and giving that complexity to the environment. So what I would recommend in your case, just especially for testing yourself and to eliminate some headache, because Intune's already a whole huge thing. To get started, if you're getting the licensing and all of that, and best practice and what's recommended would be, I would go ahead and have AD connect.
Why?
Get the licensing and then configure Intune and then figure out how that workflow would go if you're going to migrate devices or VMs or however you're going to
That's
do that. I think
glutton for punishment.
So
yeah, because it's so easy.
What I would do then, that's perfect, because then I would just spin up a
I've
couple
seen
of
some
small
companies
VMs,
not wanting to go to monitor.
pretend that those are going to be end user workstations, and then go through the workflow
And some of
yourself
them, they don't want to
figure out all
go
this stuff
the
in Intune,
full
and then that'll be the workflow
subscription
that you
license
have.
for
And if
like
there are any
Project
applications
in
you're concerned
Visio.
about for
I mean,
work,
that's probably the
maybe go
scenarios where I've
validate those
seen
too, so
people
then
still try to pull down the Office package
AD
for
join, but
those and
don't
then
hybrid.
package it up and push it into the web. And it's like,
AD
man,
connect.
so much
Yep.
work
Yep.
just to save like a couple of bucks. Yeah.
And I know that
Don't have any hybrid join. Oh.
Other stuff seems like a lot for the not
Number one thing I saw that was end user.
So if you have AD Connect, it won't hybrid join. It will automatically replicate the devices once they're registered in Intune. So it's separate. It's separate for. It's separate. Sorry, I'm. So okay, so the devices won't.
Some of them would be finished, some of them
It'd
would
be
be.
Most of them,
They'll be AD registered, and then
Office.
you'll want to go through that sequence to AD join the devices. And then that's when you would start applying the Intune policies, and you can do that without autopilot.
Why is it worth
The
that couple extra
autopilot
minutes? In most
out.
cases, people are just going to leave their computer sit there to do all the app installs anyways. It's like, we're,
Just make sure the devices automatically register
Yeah.
and join in Intune, and then you can apply those policies to it.
was it
And
back
then,
like 1.2 ones, 1.0, 1.2 before like 2.0?
From there, that's when you would start messing with autopilot and all of that. But the first,
Especially during the Momentum project, one model.
I think what, yeah, the HP.
in that profile, you wouldn't do hybrid in this scenario at all, because you have to have that hybrid connector.
No.
But you have, there's a whole other backend for it, so you have to have another connector. That's the thing that has a lot of complexity and is not recommended, because you can get a lot of the same functionality out of it and get rid of some of the limitations as well by just joining the devices and applying Intune policies directly to the machine.
IRI to M3, because now they're asking about another transfer where IRI employees are coming in. To me, it seems counterintuitive, but they're gonna, Ben just asked if I could jump into meeting at 3 because they're asking about basically what we did for what I was saying about the other day, but the other way around. And I was like, my first thought is they have to manually create some user, because we're not going to create a brand new sync binary trees for.
Yeah, we
that's
told
how
them it's like,
that's
if
how
they
I
want
would
to have a
recommend doing it,
user,
especially if
got
you're just
that
starting out
profile
to do this,
set
and then
run
as
every
you do it, you'll
so
get
many
a feel
hours.
for it,
Yeah,
and
but
it all
there's-
starts
to add the
working
attribute,
naturally,
right,
and
yeah.
you'll
They
kind
wanna
of
I
see.
wanted something to
It's-
do the opposite with it.
It's a lot of complexity, and you kind of it's hard to describe every
It's one of
single
those
detail about
things,
everything.
Who's gonna-
We're trying to we're trying to do
There's
our
our
best.
reboot.
Oh, cool! It rebooted for the name change.
That wasn't that bad. 20, 15 minutes. Maybe.
No, that was like 6.
6 minutes?
Yeah, 6, 7 minutes for the rename.
No, we have the whole Intune
Actually.
suite, and we're doing this as Azure AD only, so we don't have the
It has not been in
what we're
scope.
demonstrating.
So right back.
We're demonstrating autopilot, but what we're about to get into with the configuration profiles here, a lot of that
Yeah,
can
we're-
be
we're-
applied if
I
you
would
just
say that
have
we
it
should only
Azure AD
report-
joined.
We should only support one
In
version.
addition to
Well, I
being
don't know why
on-prem managed
To
with
do
being
bi-directional,
ADDS
like-
on-prem, and then you don't have to do the
Oh,
autopilot,
sounds
you don't
like
have
a
to rebuild the machine, and you still have
Yeah,
that connection.
especially
You
for
don't
one
need a
user.
hybrid connector.
For one user, no,
The,
it would have to be like,
Azure
if
AD
this is an
only
ongoing thing, but not
doesn't
for one user,
really-
we're gonna use binary tree for that.
Yeah.
Doesn't really
By the way, you
affect
never-
much here. It's just
Yeah.
kind of that in name,
Well,
because you're not
battery.
going to lose your on-prem if you do it that way, and if you're not enrolling it in autopilot, then it's not going to.
Oh, that's Sam.
Oh, is that Sam? Sam's
What's
not
that?
there.
You should be plugged in.
He is, but
Wait, what?
yeah, you low battery. I just don't want it to die when I was. Yeah.
Are you talking about mine?
Oh, is it yours?
Yeah, so what's weird is this little adapter thing.
Oh, is it just not?
Is it in the way of the?
It supposedly does pass through, but it doesn't appear that the power is like.
Getting enough
It
power.
probably doesn't have enough voltage.
Well, should be its own brick, so should be a lot
It's
of.
still got an hour, so you might be fine. I just don't want to die on you.
Maybe I'll stop my OneDrive sync.
There you go.
I'll suspend my
I'm
OneDrive
not sure
sync.
exactly how that's facilitated, but yes, the slide deck should be available after this. So, yeah,
right.
no problem. Do
You have like
Do you want to see?
you have 2 sections and actually 3. We need them rolled.
Yep, I'll go as quickly as I can
So-
through this. These are the ones that I'm not going to go into in detail. So,
Sure.
all right. Do you want to switch that? So, what if we plug it into my computer?
I'm
would you-
recording and everything, so
Okay. How much time do you have left on yours?
it's fine. I wouldn't worry about it.
So we're on configuration profiles.
All right, we're gonna jump back in. We're gonna talk about Windows configuration profiles. So this is akin to setting up your GPOs on-prem, and we've worked with a number of customers to help them transition those GPOs as they're looking to go to Azure AD Join. This is probably a critical part of that journey to modern management on top of the Intune process is evaluating what your device configuration profiles are going to look like.
And also, right before we went for a break here, we do have an update. It's not 60 minutes. The device rebooted while everyone was out, and now it should be renamed. So I'm just going to double check it here. Sometimes it takes a little while to replicate, so we'll give that some time.
It's renamed to Demo
serial.
Demo AA317748857, which I think is the serial number for these Surface Books. If you were to look at the properties of the device, So
we'll give that a little while.
Intune hasn't refreshed, but the computer rebooted and it has.
We're not seeing that.
Sorry about that.
Cool. All right. So for time's sake, we have a lot of content to cover still. So I'm going to do these fairly simply and just do kind of a generic walkthrough. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the settings catalog. This is probably going to feel the most familiar as far as traditional group policies go. I'm just going to walk through. I'm not going to actually
Configure all of your do that OneDrive one. That's probably the most common one.
So we'll go to add settings, and then you have this this settings picker here, and under each of these categories you'll have a number of. It should feel very familiar, just in a more friendly modern interface.
And the cool thing about this over GPO is you can actually search. How many times have you not known where a GPO is unless you go and look at the summary page and you start expanding out the tree and like, oh, that's where that setting is. Yeah, so like for example, to enable OneDrive known folder redirection, I think there's like 3 or 4 different ones, like silently move the known folders and sign in the user. You're in the right spot. You can lock it down to the certain organization. All those settings would be here. So silently move the folders.
Oh,
that's probably the most common one. So then once you select the option, then you click out of the page using X at the top corner, and then you can go in and actually configure those settings.
And so you'll take your tenant ID that's in your Azure portal and put it in there. Show notifications if you want. Otherwise, they'll silently move. I also like to silently sign in users to the OneDrive Sync app with their Windows credentials, assuming that the UPN matches, just so that way they don't get prompted the first time they sign in and have to go through that process manually. I'm not sure. Well, I should do it.
There you go. You get too many windows open,
I know.
man.
That is
It's
one
the, it's
thing.
the tab right to the side of it.
Oh, well,
Go to the tab right in the middle. Says create profile right there.
create
at the top.
profile.
There
Yeah.
you go.
I was just looking for the tenant ID.
Oh, sure.
So that way it'll actually provision. All right, there we go. So I'll show a notification just for demo purposes.
Sure.
Scope tags, and then assignments. I will add all users. Well, actually, no, I won't because we're doing it this way. So add groups, Intune users. And you can also set that as a device wide
Setting.
thing if there were local accounts as well. It would do that. I know it's not common, but there we go. So there, now that policy is set and configured. So once this policy hits this computer, it should automatically sign into OneDrive on the next sign in. Next, profile. I like to run through this one first before jumping into the settings catalog. Generally speaking, I will go into device restrictions and create, just because it gives a little bit of a more simplistic overview. Device restrictions. And it's laid out more like the settings application. So this is where you can basically get a nice condensed, well, let's block the App Store, for example, or auto update. If you don't want things to update, you would block that, et cetera. Those sorts of things. Cellular and connectivity, that's pretty limited. Cloud and storage.
You can find a lot of these in the settings catalog too. Just this categorizes them a little bit easier.
This one's usually easier when you're just trying to get a baseline configured. So cloud and storage, I wouldn't allow like the equivalent of Windows Live accounts, like personal Microsoft accounts. And then, yeah.
Do you recommend setting up a device restriction profile, or would it be better to do it in the settings catalog so you have it all in one place?
I usually like to start out with the device restrictions when you're testing it and when you're just kind of getting a feel for it. And then once you feel confident, once you validated a lot of that, and I'm saying like just when you're really in the initial phases of testing initially, like the first couple of times before you want to get really serious, I would do that. But when you're really starting to try and translate all your GPOs over and you're really ready to move and shift that workload, that's when I would dive into the settings catalog and get more granular. Yep. One thing that I really do like about these policies, though, and this is where I would recommend using this, is to deploy printers. You literally just have to deploy the DNS name of the printer. And if you're okay with the driver that Windows Update would normally supply for that printer automatically, it'll automatically install that printer, and it actually works, and it is that simple. And I was surprised the first time when I did that it didn't give a bunch of headaches. So that would be the one case I would recommend using this one.
Network printers versus using universal print.
How does that work in hybrid environment?
With the hybrid environment, if it's domain joined and that machine has that line of sight to the printer, then that should just join it fairly.
No record creation, automatically have like an actual object.
If you have a print server with a printer, yeah, you just put in the server, whack server / printer name, and then it'll connect right to it.
And you don't even necessarily need the print server either. It will actually pick up the printers individually if you have a DNS name set on the printer specifically too.
Let us know. See if Windows 11 will behave, right?
Let's see. So I'll set both devices and users. Applicability. Oh, get too far in the weeds.
So that's a great way to use some pre-canned categories of settings to be able to do that as deployment.
Some of the other templates that we have here as well. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but just to give a good idea. Administrative templates right here is very similar to the settings catalog, except for some of the features don't work. These are more of a direct port from GPO, so your results may vary with some of those.
Don't recommend using those anymore.
Yep.
Settings catalog.
Settings catalog is the way to go. Delivery optimization,
also there's a good there's some settings in the settings catalog for that too.
Yeah.
Typically, I would say more modernly we've seen the templates used would be things like VPNs and wireless. For the Wi-Fi, it makes it easy just to kind of specify the wireless network name and some of the settings. As you start to really dig into, and I'll kind of show a slide on this. So we talked about restrictions. There's things like switching modes, kiosk devices. And then for like the Wi-Fi, it's super simple, right? You push a wireless name, you push an SSID, you push a key, and then it syncs it up and it's able to connect if you've got a very simple Wi-Fi configuration. Now, where we see a lot of customers is when they have enterprise configurations, when they have enterprise WPA, they're pushing certificates to be able to join to their wireless network. And the list of prereqs, don't fall over in shock. It's essentially this intensive to be able to have native Intune abilities to use wireless or enterprise WPA. And you have to have all these components in place. You have to have the Intune certificate connector installed. You have to have a trusted certificate, which is usually going to be your root certificate installed. And then you have to go through and set up a PKCS certificate profile. So there's quite a few steps to do it, but we do have customers that are leveraging the ability for Azure AD joined devices to enroll a certificate through the connector onto their device and then connect to their wireless network. So,
Can you force not changing? On my
can you do like a device restriction to policy to prevent them from being able to change that, from preventing them from being able to add other networks? Yeah, I believe there's a.
I think there
I
might
don't
be
know
something
which
in settings catalog.
I don't know which specifically that one is, but it is there.
You can block specific networks, and then you can block all networks as well, except for what you apply. It's like my shared devices. I have a specific network, and they don't have the ability to connect to any other Wi-Fi, so they can't take it to a
Hardened security for being able to connect to those networks. Yep, that's pretty common too.
And VPN is also another really good one here as well. While we're on the networking.
That's the last one here afterwards. Okay. There we go.
So you can set it for user or device. And Microsoft has been expanding their vendors that are actually in here now. So Checkpoint, AnyConnect, Citrix, F5, Palo Alto, Pulse Secure, Sonic Wall, and then they have all the manual standard ones as well. So I'm just gonna, I don't know why I picked F5. I'll just use AnyConnect. Base VPN, you would just go in and configure all the settings like you would in the AnyConnect.
XML configuration file.
Yep. And then you would put that here, and then it's nice because you can force it to be always on. And so if you want to enforce VPN, this makes it simple, and you don't have to install the agent. It runs natively through the Windows networking stack. So
would that make it always be on, like on first login, or?
As soon as it gets the profile.
Yeah, as soon as it boots, yeah. And if you have that deployed to the device and you have your VPN controller or concentrator set up to where it doesn't have to do user authentication, but like device authentication. So I've seen that as well. So long as it sees that that device has a cert and it trusts that cert, then it can log in as soon as that device is booted. Correct.
Probably going to deploy that as an app.
Yeah, this is very simplistic. This is almost
very brief overview. There are a lot of different use cases and scenarios and network types and configurations. So
that's like so I would akin this to the basic wireless profile, right? With a basic wireless profile, you can drop a couple settings in, and if the configuration is very lightweight, then that should work. We recognize that that is very few and far between. And there's a lot of customers that do have the requirement for a cert and umbrella in the client. And so if you're okay with this simplest approach, then it works. But in the real world, it's just not really feasible.
And there are some ways to work around it. Like if you absolutely have to be connected to a VPN because of like an extension that references a database that you need connection for to deploy it out of box, I don't really recommend doing that. It's usually more hassle than it's worth. But that would be an instance of it. But it would take a lot more effort, generally speaking, than it is valuable. So, all right.
For the sake of time, since we kind of showed a couple of those profiles, let's jump into apps. So there's a lot of really great options now within the apps configuration. So you want to give the quick little verbiage on why you want to stick to either line of business or Win32 apps?
Sure. So, well, actually, can I just go down the list so that way I don't lose track of what I'm doing?
Sure.
Cool. All right, so I'll start with the new App Store. I'm not going to go through legacy because it's being deprecated and completely removed from this. So we're not going to worry about that. The new one is the WinRM base that we were talking about earlier. I'll use Adobe as an example. So when you are building this profile, it has a nice search feature. It's still fairly limited since it's relatively new. I'll do Adobe Acrobat Reader. But you have all these other options in here as well. So what it'll do is it'll auto-populate the name, publisher, and then the package ID. It'll install by system, which goes back to what we were talking about with the enrollment status page. I would set it to productivity as the category and then show it in the company portal. And then you have to select your own logo.
We can skip it for
yeah,
now.
we're not doing that. But if you wanted to have the Adobe logo and look nice, you would download one and put it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it as required, but you can set it to uninstall if it's already installed. Say you accidentally rolled it out or you don't want it anymore. That's how you would uninstall it.
We should do it available for all devices and or all users, and then we can push the company portal one down. I think that'd be a good
Question, is it only for 32 or
for this one, it depends on the app and how they packaged it. But I believe there's a combination of both. With the enrollment.
do available for enrolled devices. Just
Okay.
do all users or do your group, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can go and we can do the
Well, actually, how about this? Oh, well, whatever.
company portal one. We'll make that
I'm
one.
not sure if the company portal will sync fast enough with the enrollment thing, but we'll see. All right, those apps, and then add.
That's the only downside of an Intune enrolled device. It doesn't automatically install a company portal. Don't know why.
You wanted a reader on most PCs, but wanted standard on a select few.
That's a great way to do it too, especially now that it's all moved to the Adobe has moved to their SSO for their licensing for some of those. You can push down the app and then essentially with their SSO, it automatically activate it.
You can force the install of these apps if the Windows machine already has company portal, but it doesn't.
Yes, you can. So the company portal really is only good for ones that you make available, right? So you can push required apps and absolutely. Absolutely. It just doesn't allow you to have some of that self-service, which we've seen with some customers where you say, okay, we package these apps for this department, but not everyone has it. We just want to maybe make it available. And that way, certain managers or power users can help others within the department manage some of those applications, which is a typical scenario we've seen.
And not every business wants the company portal either. So that's why you have to download it manually. So
you do reader through the MS store, it can update.
Yep,
As it
updates through the store,
right?
automatically.
You don't even have to worry about pulling down new versions because Microsoft, as new bits are available for it, will push it.
All right, and then everybody's favorite, Microsoft 365. This is pretty standard across just about everything. So I'm not going to get into the whole Office side of it and the configuration stuff over there, but all the policies that you would set on that side would apply just like it would with anything else. You can set it to featured. I'm going to set it as required just because it's Office.
Yes, you can set the update channel on that as well.
So you can use the configuration designer, which is right here, which is it's fairly straightforward and user-friendly. But if you do currently have like an XML, you can also use that. I'm going to select all of these except for Skype for Business. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this just to save a little bit of time.
And access. We want them using Power Automate.
Yes.
Power Apps.
All right, so we'll just do Excel, OneNote, Outlook, PowerPoint, what have you.
Actually, uncheck OneNote.
Yeah, actually. Okay.
Because we can push down the Windows one if it's not already there. Probably won't, and that's where you would want to have the additional subscription licenses for Project and for Visio as well. Otherwise, I've seen customers, and I was talking to Andrew about it, we've seen them package it, and it's painful.
And then you can set your default file format. Here's where you'd set your update channel. So current channel preview, monthly, enterprise, semi-annual, enterprise, and then there's also the preview of that.
Current.
Yeah. Remove other versions, yes. Version to install latest. If you need a specific version, you can also choose that. Shared computer activation. When you're doing Intune and Autopilot, I generally like to do that so that way it doesn't tie the computer to that license and it doesn't use one of those users' allocated device allotments. And then when the user signs out, then another user can sign in, and then it'll basically be their registered Office if it's a multi-user PC or if you gave it to somebody else. But
I like you didn't have to say no to the install being. Used to have to change that. Right, go for it.
And then searchers, I'm not going to worry about it. Language.
I wouldn't even do anything there. Just leave it as the default.
All right. Then required. And I'll select it for users and devices. Devices will remove the default user install of the built-in Windows ones as well. So then you won't get that like double install. Let's see, and then we'll go through
Edge.
All right, so here's the new Edge. Show this as a featured app if you want to make it optional. Let's see, stable operating system required. It depends on per app and how you want to deploy it. I'm just doing it like this right now for this particular purpose. But if you have an application that only runs from like a user perspective, or there are certain scenarios where if you have like something tied to like LDAP or whatever and it needs specific user authentication, that would be something that you would do there. Or if you just want to install it as a user, or if you just want to install this, it's basically your preference. I'm just doing it like this.
Typically
right
for like Office and Edge and some other core apps that you deploy to everyone, and you usually just do all devices. So that way it's part of your base install. Do a web link.
Shared machines.
Yeah, with the shared activation. Which order to do the installations?
Yeah, so let's say it's like Adobe Acrobat, not the license.
Sure.
So let's say you apply all licenses, have it. Does it precedence on lesser privileged group?
It will install it for everyone. In that case, usually what I'll do is set up SSO with Adobe, and then the people that have licenses actually tie them into that SSO enterprise app too. So then that way we know who can use the SSO, and then that same group also gets tied back to the app. So we know those people can authenticate and install the application. Right. And that's where it's usually easier to say, okay, well, we know that this department has these devices, so they're going to all have Adobe versus I'm going to pop in as an admin, which we've seen all happen before, right? You give yourself certain GPOs as an admin, you log in the computers, and those GPOs would apply. And back in the day, it would be cached files, right? Your home drive would map, and then your files would cache on someone's computer because you're logging in as an admin. One of the old school examples. Go ahead, Sam.
Cool.
So
All right, so we're gonna package a web link. So this is like if you wanted for intranet or something like that, for example.
Or shortcut.
Shortcuts.
Push a shortcut to everyone.
Yep. So we're using our company, and we're awesome as an example. So I will make this available for enrolled devices.
Are you able to use, like, you want to pick your own custom group within Intune, let's say like developers or like IT help desk, and then use that to sign?
Absolutely.
That's exactly. Yep. These are security groups that I'm using right now for assignments. So if you have AD Connect, that'll replicate your current groups. If you have it configured that way, those groups will replicate. Then you would assign it like that to those.
If you have your departments, your titles, your offices, your countries populated in your users, you can actually use that as a criteria too. You can create a dynamic group that says, if you see the department field be IT, then let's put that against the deployment. So that anyone that's IT would be able to have that ability to do the install.
All right. So I have one thing that I want to talk about. There are two ways to manually package apps: line of business app packaging and Windows app in Win32 format. The line of business app is a little bit deceptive because it's a little bit easier, but it's limited to MSIs, and it is not best practice and can cause conflicts with the installation process and device deployment if you mix those with the Win32. So best practice would be to use Win32 across the board, because there are certain apps that only come in EXEs, and those unfortunately take a little bit of extra finagling sometimes to package via these packaging mechanisms. But the benefits of the MSIs, for example, and which is what I'm going to walk through here, it'll auto-populate a lot of the information. So it says select app package file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open PowerShell, and then this is where I have this saved. So there's a utility that Microsoft provides to package application called Intune Win App Util. So I'm going to run the Intune Win App Util, and then it'll ask me for a source folder. So what I have here, I can do this in the GUI, so that'll make a little more sense. So I have so I have my demo, and then I have my source and my outs. I'm going to package Google Chrome as an example. So the source folder would be, it'll be C, oops, yeah, demo.
We still your semicolons.
Or C, oops. Oh.
Doesn't matter that you said Win32, but you're executable.
No, it doesn't matter. It's just the naming.
Like a deceptive way to name it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 64-bit.
It should have just been executable.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to copy the name of the installer. And then output folder will be C demo out. And then I'll navigate over here. And then this doesn't have a catalog file, so I'll hit no. And so this is packaging the MSI into the format that it wants. So I'll go into the out folder here. This is the .intune min file it generated. And then select app package file. And then I will go to that directory. And then I will select my Intune Win. It'll give you the information for MSIs. Again, like I said, it'll pull the app version or whatever the publishers contributed. And then you have to enter a publisher name for everything. I'm not let's see. Okay. And then I'll show it as featured category, productivity. Same thing, logo. And then this will pre-populate the MSI exec command and run it silently. So that way, if it doesn't run silently and if you package it and it requires a GUI or any interaction, it will not work through autopilot. So keeping that in mind, if you have any sort of interactive installers that can't be scripted or don't have flags or switches, you won't want to use those with autopilot because it will just error out because there's no profile desktop environment while it's provisioning in that out-of-box sequence and during the status enrollment page for that to pop up. So it'll just freak out and there won't be anything there. So let's see. And then you can allow it to, there are a bunch of you can also configure a minimum operating system version. So for this particular configure detection rules, that's the one that you'll use that'll auto-populate when you select MSI, and it'll come up with the MSI product code automatically, and you don't have to really do anything else. So there is that. Dependencies. So say that you needed, I'm trying to think of a good example. .NET, yeah. Say you needed .NET to run Chrome. This is where you would already have to have had it packaged, because obviously if we don't have .NET, we can't set it as a dependency. So if it is reliant on something else, you would either find it in any of the other methods that we've gone through, and then you would add it here.
Which is nice because I think this has been here less than a year for dependencies and supersedence.
Yep, this is pretty new.
Yeah, and so that's kind of falls more in line with the traditional CCM behavior. You can say, okay, this is required to be on the machine, but then if you, let's say you install a new version and you hit next, you can actually have that newer version packaged for supersedence. So you can say, okay, well, this particular version now is being superseded by this other one.
And then so the version that this populated earlier on when it uploaded the package, the 66 whatever it was, if we had like 65 version, this would show up here, and then you could do this, and then you would set it to uninstall. Basically, it's not giving us the options because we don't have it in here right now, but that's how that flow would work, and that's how you would handle the update process.
So that's a big step for a lot of those complex applications, where instead of having a script inside of the Intune Win package, you essentially can have each of those apps packaged individually, and you can have them as dependencies. So you have each of those dependencies install,
and then have the core app install.
Because the way that you used to have to do it before is you would have to go into the app description of the policy or the profile that's created for it, and then you would re-upload a new Intune win. And in doing so, with an MSI, you would have to go through this entire process that we just went through again. For an MSI, it's not that difficult, but if you're going to update an application that runs as an EXE and it has a bunch of dependencies and you have to do all this custom scripting and install and uninstall commands and everything, you're going to have to re-enter all of those again too. So it's a huge win to have that ability now. All right, so we finished uploading. Our installer's here and is set to deploy to both user and the device. Do we have any questions on any of this so far? I know it seems a little tedious, but once you get the hang of packaging the apps, it gets a little easier. It's a little rocky at first, but it's
make sure the packaging too have a separate source folder for each.
Yes.
Otherwise, somebody else is doing the packaging. I'm like, why are these apps like 8 times the size they need to be? They have one source folder. And then they just kept on putting MSIs.
Wow.
Uploaded like 8 apps, and then they just call it the install string for the water. So, yeah.
You work smart, not hard, right?
Yeah. So they're setting all this additional stuff in.
Right.
Yep. But the nice thing about doing that is if you have like a README or like an installation instruction or like a reference material that you want to put in the installer but you don't want it to install, you can go to the like product cache folder where the installer gets downloaded by this mechanism. If say you had like a specific like, actually I wouldn't even license it this way. Never mind. I'm just gonna let that go.
All right, let's dig into updates.
Oh, apps. Windows. All right. So the first one we'll cover. Another thing that I wanted to mention that I know is not in the PowerPoint, PowerShell scripts. You can add custom PowerShell scripts in here and run them through the Intune agent. The caveat with these, they'll only run once they're applied, and then they won't run again unless they're unassigned and then reassigned.
That's why I recommend proactive remediation instead.
Yep.
It's a much better mechanism because then you can verify that setting is always there and it will redo it like as often as you set the frequency.
If you modify the script, it'll rerun as well.
Yeah, if
Sure.
you upload a new version of it, it will rerun.
But just from like the simplicity standpoint, just trying to do something real quick. I've seen a lot of people get hung up on that. So let's see. All right, let's start with update rings for Windows. So we'll create update ring. Microsoft product updates, yes. So that'll also download updates for like Office, what have you. Windows drivers.
That's pretty new, I believe, to update drivers. It'll pull it from the Windows, from Microsoft. It'll actually do their WQL version of drivers for any of the products that you have installed.
Yep. And then you can set the deferral period for quality and future updates. The nice thing about this, and this is where I would create a separate ring policy. For time's sake, again, I'm not going to worry about it right now, but this is how you could stage your upgrade from Windows 10 to Windows 11. And you could roll it out in waves or however, just like you would with anything else. This device is already on Windows 11, so we don't need to mess with that. Feature update uninstall period, 10 days. You can set that however you like. This one has a caveat, the pre-release builds. You have to enroll your organization in that first. So even if you enable it and I set Windows Insider, it's not going to work unless your organization is actually enrolled and a licensing administrator has approved that. And I wouldn't recommend just rolling that out to everybody. That would be more like a one-off to just see what might come down the pipeline or however else you would use Windows Insider. Automatic update behavior. You can set the maintenance windows here. It's 8 to 5. That way it won't install any update. Well, this is just, it'll install after 5 p.m. and it won't install after 8 a.m. essentially. So it'll try and go overnight. Restart checks. If it knows that it needs to restart,
that's pretty new too.
Yeah,
It's really annoying to have to reboot before you start installs. So.
Yep. And there's some battery feature. Well, okay. Set to skip. I'll check before restart. Battery level equals 40%. User presence. Display needed. Presentation mode. Full screen mode. Phone call state. Game mode, etc. So those are some examples of what would
check before it would actually do a restart.
Yep. Pause Windows updates. This could be disabled. Do I need to go any further with Windows updates?
I think that's
feel
fine.
like everyone kind of.
Do you need M365 licensing for? Do you need it for feature updates? I know you do for Windows 11. We don't have appropriate licensing.
Like talking about like the W365, the enterprise licensing.
Yeah, we have like E3.
I think you should still be able to use Intune to just do your regular updates.
Yeah, it didn't work for feature updates during autopilot, and you can't do Windows 11 without going to M365. So there's a limitation that you couldn't due to the licensing.
Do you currently have the subscription licenses assigned to
If
your
you have
users?
M365, it should be included.
I think feature updates, I believe those and have the M365 as well.
You either
check on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was when we were getting it all up and running, our systems would come in, we'd try to get the latest feature update, they'd build. Dug through the documentation, open cases with Microsoft, and eventually found that you had to have M365 licensing to do the feature updates. Also for Windows 11.
Did you have KMS at one point?
No.
Okay. Interesting.
I couldn't get feature updates to work. We have an RMM that does them anyways, so it's like, yeah, I just wanted to work during the autopilot phase. That's again what part of our roadmap is to get to M365.
Sure.
Like everything we have, but we have the Enterprise Security Mobility E5.
Right.
And it was not sufficient licensing for feature updates.
And that wouldn't be because it's if you look at full M365, that includes Windows Windows 10 and 11 E3, depending on what. So that would be the license. Yeah,
that's really interesting that that would prevent that.
But we're using full autopilot. We've got everything going.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, we have Office and EMS to be able to use Intune.
It should work okay with
just
volume
Intune
licensing. You just have to have Windows licensed in
activated devices.
Activated and yeah,
So there's some weirdness with some of the updates being licensing.
And how they're streaming down those updates, maybe even like what version they're pushing down through Intune. Could be the enterprise one, maybe that they're pushing down through Intune versus just Pro.
And that one I know would have issues if you don't have the mode switch or not mode switch, the licensing activation switch or what have you. Anyway, I'm just gonna get these assigned here real quick. Right. So this would be update rings, and then feature updates. I'll just put the newest one in here right now. The newest one would be, well, I'll push out Windows 11 22H2 because that's what this computer has. Or 22H2.
Which, in this case, for this particular machine, you probably wouldn't see it do any changes since it has 22H2. But there were others that you could target this feature update ring.
And if you didn't want certain devices, say in the medical field, like you have expensive equipment that's required to have a specific version of Windows that's validated only for that version, you could put those in a group if you have them into managed and exclude them from this so they wouldn't get hit by that update. So we got that, and then quality updates. These ones.
This would be where if you have 22H2 and you wanted to go to a specific security build for May of 2023.
So once you start managing, these updates, these are the security updates that generally roll out on like Patch Tuesdays. So this is the band, and then if there's out of band, like one that doesn't fall on a Tuesday because they had to patch some vulnerability that was out of schedule, you would see OOB. And so once you
see
start,
a B very often.
yeah.
If you click that drop down real quick, so I guess
We've
it is
actually
there.
been in band for a little while.
Oh wow.
But so with these, when they get released, you'll have to come in here and manually create a new profile and assign those. It's a little bit of a hassle, but in the case a security update might break something, it gives you the flexibility to roll out or decide when you're going to roll out that particular security update. I mean, obviously they're going to have the Defender for the antivirus ones pull down and that sort of stuff, but these are like the bigger ones that happen every or on Patch Tuesdays. So
are you not allowed to just go in and like, if you create a security profile, are you allowed to go in and just update it to a newer one, or do you have to make a new?
Depends
profile?
how you have Windows updates controlled. You know, if you allow people to go in and run Windows updates out of band, then you can do that. Otherwise, if you know this update came out and you wanted to push it out as soon as possible, that's when you would create a quality update to get that security patch into your end user's hands as quickly as possible.
Yep. And it's good to keep an eye on it anyway, just so you don't lose track of it and get behind, because I've seen that happen a few times. All right, so that is Windows Update.
Awesome.
Long-term servicing branch PCs would have a lower version of Windows 10. Would you have to select that early version for?
That is one that
you probably would have to bring it up to a newer version to be able to target that quality build.
We had Windows LTSB 2016. Had to get it up to LTSC 2019.
Yeah. Yeah, the LTSBs are, Microsoft does not recommend those, even from the perspective of not having your devices updated regularly. There's other mechanisms they recommend to be able to lock it out of doing updates in those circumstances.
Have you seen organizations leveraging Windows Auto Patch much yet?
Starting to. It's still been pretty slow adoption since it's new, and everyone is a little gun shy on new features and making sure that it doesn't cause any irreparable impacts to their deployments.
And it's also not just like you can go click it and turn it on. You have to fill out a form, and it's a little more involved. So.
Right. So then when it comes to updates, Microsoft actually, really, this was the user community. They had a really nice update compliance report that you would deploy and you would turn on certain features in the tenant. Now within the admin center, Microsoft has actually enabled it to where you can go, as long as it lets me log in this time, drum roll, boom. All right. So you go into the software updates and underneath of settings, I think it's org settings. I used a shortcut the other day to try to get into this. Let's see. Is it under health? Thank you. I'm so used to deploying it with thank you. There we go. This is where you configure the settings. I think. Were you able to get a subscription turned on? The trial might not have been able to turn that on, but essentially you would turn on the information here, and it actually will collect more enriched data within the software updates, and then be able to come over here into your Intune portal under reports, and underneath some of the workbooks to be able to see that. But I need to make sure that we have this turned on. We just set up this tenant for the sake of the demo, and it doesn't look like the Azure license is showing up back up. Maybe we'll circle back around on that one. if you can take a peek on that one, Sam.
Yeah.
So we kind of walked through Windows updates. Wanted to really dive in a little bit more around the remainder of our time on the other half of what's inside of Intune, and that's really around the security management. So it's not from, think of it not necessarily from looking at security from a SecOps perspective, but from configuring the tool set. So a lot of our customers, we have this conversation of what is Intune really do in this circumstance. It really is a security configuration plane. It's not a security visibility plane that you would assign to your SOC teams or your MSSPs. This is where we go in and we say, okay, we've decided as an organization, we want to adopt, the Microsoft tool set as our endpoint security plane because it does things like EDR and threat and vulnerability management. We can leverage Secure Score to enhance our security just blanked on the word, enhance our security posture. Thank you. We're able to use the built-in anti-malware that's in Windows and activate that. Leverage next generation protection through the EDR that comes as part of Defender. We're able to leverage attack surface reduction, which we'll talk a little bit in detail in the next couple of moments inside of Windows and turn those features on, as well as being able to leverage the tool set from a security management perspective, your SOC and your MSSP. They can start to then leverage the things like automated investigation, response, and managed threat hunting. So we still need a way to be able to turn that functionality on within our tenant. And so that's really twofold. I'll come back to this in just a second. But in terms of enabling some of those EDR capabilities inside of Intune, we would do that within the endpoint detection and response blade and turn on a policy to push out to our users, as well as go into the security portal as an E3 or E5 customer and enable that Intune connection, which I took a screenshot of and off just to show that's what we would turn on. And then I also turn on that EDR and block mode. So really then that is the Defender agent protecting the endpoint separate from Intune, which we can do as well through a policy and turning on the onboarding into Intune. So I wanted to kind of cover that here on how we would enable some of those security pieces that you normally see through third parties.
Where do you want me to go? Because I believe I actually can do this.
Go into the health and Windows update.
All right.
So as we talk about policies and practices, we kind of cover this in the previous sections as well. Where's the best place to configure things within Intune? There's ways to take from a security posture perspective. Microsoft has these concepts of security baselines. Don't use them. Don't use them. Those are managed by the security and Windows teams. Those are not managed by the Intune product group. And because of that, they have not been updated in some time. So the settings within them, if you were to compare them to the actual policies within each of the different endpoint security sections, they're slightly newer, but I've tend to find that a lot of the most up-to-date settings, Microsoft, or at least the Intune product team, is putting their efforts into the software catalog and some of those, the settings catalog, and being able to manage and turn on some of those settings there. So in some cases, and I like to use ASR as an example, what I've seen is that while you have a number of policies in the, as I mentioned, the baselines that are out of date, there are some inside of the actual attack surface reduction policy. But then as you start to drill down into the settings catalog, you find even more that are there. And as Microsoft adds more, if you wanted to control some of the state of those ASR rules manually, you could actually add in that name and the value to activate it, which essentially is like a GUID. It's like a 25-character GUID that turns that setting on in Windows. It just happens to be easier.
In the settings catalog instead of the endpoint security node?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
I've been doing it in there because I've seen there be a few in there that aren't included in the actual policy.
Because there's the baseline and then there's the endpoint security node,
Yep.
but you do it in the settings.
Yep. So I've been doing it in the settings catalog as of late.
I'm so happy I just heard that from
there's been a couple that'll pop in there before they're actually updated in the policy, which is crazy because there's different parts of the product group that manage those, and some of those and now this may change now that they've gone GA with the settings catalog, so they may not update it as frequently. My hope is that they do. So definitely managing a lot of these settings, at least for things like attack surface reduction, it's easier to do there. Now, there are some other pieces as we start to dig in that, it's a lot easier to use some of the blades within the endpoint security section, like antivirus. This is a little bit of an eye chart. When you get a chance to take a look at the deck, it'll make a little bit more sense in terms of what are some of these settings that will turn on by default. But keep in mind that really, when we look at malware protection and anti-malware protection on a Windows device, it really is at its core Defender engine and EDR mode being turned on, and the base Windows Defender that's been in Windows since what, XP? They've just continued to enhance that engine, and as part of enhancing that engine, they've added all these capabilities. So, by default, you want to turn on cloud protection and real-time monitoring, but then maybe you want to turn on the ability to scan removable drives or the network, or you want to control how much of your CPU is used when you do full system scan. Even setting up full-time system scans or quick scans, that's where you control those within this antivirus policy. So all of that's still managed within a policy that is controlling the Windows Defender engine within Windows itself. And one of the things to call out, there's actually two. So potentially unwanted apps, that's one that you would turn on. You would turn on the cloud protection, which is essentially that map service, to be able to talk to the Microsoft Cloud to say, all right, there's this new executable, is this malicious? That's part of that cloud-based service. And then some of the on-access protection. And so different customers have different thoughts around where to set some of these severity levels. But what I've seen commonly across customers is if it's low, we want to clean it, if possible. If it's at moderate, we want to quarantine it. And even if it's at high, we want to quarantine it. And that way you give admins and that users the ability to release it. If it really is not malicious, maybe it's a business app that is doing some weird network calls or generating some sort of traffic, that's where you would set it to quarantine, and then you can manage those exceptions inside of, from what I've been doing as of late, the Defender portal. It's actually easier when you see those threats that come in to manage those exceptions. And then remove if it's severe. If it's severe, we don't want to even have to think about it. It's gone. We're going to have it removed from the machine. So those are the core components. What I've seen recently, there's actually new settings as part of that AV engine as Microsoft is starting to introduce server management policies in Intune and being able to use some components of Intune to control policy settings on servers. I think it's like 2019 and higher. You're able to leverage these policies to control how servers are able to respond. And so these are some of the new settings that are within that antivirus configuration panel. Yes?
Do you have to enroll a server in Intune to do this, or can you use that MDE?
The MDE enrollment component, correct. That's okay. Inside of Intune. And so that has its requirements too. Usually it's the server has to be at Azure AD synced. So that way it becomes hybrid joined. And then when it's hybrid joined, then it can push those policies down. So antivirus policies and firewall policies are two that are supported, and just as of late, actually even attack surface reduction rules. So those
would that be the recommended way to manage the policies for servers? Is it MDE enrollment?
Yep.
Or would it be an Intune enrollment, or could you go either way?
I would start with the hybrid enrollment through the MDE. So that's the Microsoft documented and supported path to manage those servers as we start to see more enterprises fully sunset their SCCM, shut those servers down. You still needed a control plane, and that's why Microsoft is introducing these policies.
Okay.
And so some of these new settings allow you to really control how the network stack performs and behaves on some of those servers, because maybe you want to harden some of those, but you still want to allow them to have that cloud connectivity to Defender and to Intune in the Microsoft cloud.
Nice.
So there's quite a lot of the antivirus policy that you want to configure, as well as the firewall. So that's another complementary policy that you would set up on your workstations as well. Being able to turn on some of those capabilities on workstations as well as on servers. You can control the 3 profiles: public, private, and domain, and they all have different behaviors, as well as logging. So if you wanted to have specific servers where they log to a specific location and increase the log file size, you could do that on specific high-profile devices. Along with being able to configure some of the rules. So being able to allow inbound traffic of certain ports and types. We're starting to see some of these projects pick up with customers where traditionally they've got EDRs and their network's hardened, but they've had GPOs turn off the firewall because it takes a lot of work to really monitor the traffic that comes through on those devices to ensure that you're not turning on the firewall and shutting down your business. So that's another policy that is supported across not only Windows 10 and 11, but also Windows servers.
There's a large discussion now with the network security teams and the workstation teams. Where do you have that setting? Do you have it in your ACLs on your layer 3 firewall device? Put up 50 VLANs, or do you do it here, or a combination of both?
Sure.
Lively discussion.
Right, and you know, I've seen those lines drawn, or where they're bigger network shops or Cisco shops versus like Microsoft. Because in some of those environments, you'll find that Microsoft can have a heavier weight than Cisco and vice versa. And so in those scenarios, they'll do all the VLANing and do it at the network layer, the layer 3 layer versus at the software layer.
Question. So could you, like, for example, restrict certain accounts not being able to RDP into certain machines, or RDP into one machine and vice versa?
You could lock down a machine. Yeah, you could apply a policy to a specific group of machines to not allow that type of traffic and block it in the firewall. And then someone tries to tamper with it, then they get a notification, and then the admin gets a notification as an incident inside of the Defender portal. Someone tries to remove rules that they shouldn't or start tinkering around with the firewall, then the admin gets notified. So that's another reason why Defender is complementary to this, because then you get all that alerts and notifications. Disk encryption, that's another vector as well of security. BitLocker, being able to upload those BitLocker keys into the cloud, that's been something that's been supported for 4 or 5 years now with Azure AD Join. So that way you don't have to manage those inside of Active Directory or manage those inside of SCCM. It's just automatically stored in the cloud. The only caveat is cleaning up your Azure Active Directory devices. You kind of have to allow them to really sit around. Even if you have a Intune policy that says to clean up stale devices, essentially unenroll them, you still have that Azure AD object, because you want to leave that object around. So what happens if this machine that's been sitting offline for 9 months, you turn it on and they pulled some piece of hardware out of it, and now you can't get into it because the hard drive is locked out. So having that object still in Azure AD to be able to get access to that BitLocker key is kind of a best practice, even though it makes your Azure AD a little more messier with devices. The other thing to kind of call out with the BitLocker policy is if you turn on one setting, you have to turn on and configure them all. Even if you don't want to use them, you still have to configure the removable drive setting and say not to encrypt it. You still have to enable the fixed drive policy. So these all have to be turned on. They all have to have the same encryption type.
And one thing I will note when configuring these as well is if you go and start configuring something and then change a setting and then ultimately turn it off, it will still keep that sub setting and it'll gray it out, so it'll look like it's not there, but you'll have to go back and undo those changes as well.
You'll have to turn it back on so you can turn it off, so then you can turn it off again. So thinking through how you leverage Intune to manage those policies. Spend that extra time on the front end, make sure those are documented so you're not having to go through and make other changes. And you can adjust these based on different devices, but we found that when you have one of these policies deployed and pushed out to all your devices, you really aren't, besides stepping up encryption, that's only been the other scenario I've seen customers change this.
So when you're for customers that, like, obviously it's 128 by default, enabling 256 does not.
Right. It does not actually change the
How
encryption.
are you guys managing that with customers?
Proactive remediations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's being able to run some checks on the machine, and then in some cases now, does it automatically, if you run the right command, does it change encryption, get to decrypt it and re-encrypt it?
In my testing, I've had to completely decrypt
Decrypt
the
it,
drive and
yeah.
re-encrypt it, and so we're just gonna leave it at 128 for now. We don't feel like
Yeah,
dealing with it,
at least it's better than what was the other one that wasn't AES? I haven't even seen that one in a while. The older one. there's actually, I think, one other encryption that's even lower than the 128 one. I've not seen that one in a while, but
64, whatever it was.
I don't even know if it was 64. I'd have to go look out in the portal. If we have some time, I'll go peek in there at the end. So outside of the EDR policies and the baseline antivirus policies and firewall and BitLocker, those are some pretty intensive security measures for a workstation. However, there's even more. There is the concept of attack surface reduction that is built into Windows. And there's actually 5 different components of this through the actual ASR rules, exploit protection, device control, which it allows you to do some level of USB management, which has gotten a lot better. I've seen customers use third-party tools to do and manage what type of USB devices can be plugged in to computers, to have, I've seen like encrypted USBs that are allowed by just that one hardware device ID, so their employees can transfer data or transfer data to customers. So that's matured a lot. App and browser isolation and application control are 2 others. I'll touch on the most common ones. So the most common one, really, and we've already talked about this a little bit, is those attack surface reduction rules. Previously, Microsoft only allowed, I think it was allow, block, or audit. And recently, a lot with being able to actually have a warn mode, they actually allow per rule exclusions. So you can actually exclude certain devices or device groups from certain rules. Some of the more common ones I've seen, and you actually can see one of them here, is Office. So some Office integrations by certain applications would trigger ASR. And usually it would only trigger it for a very small subset of the organization, like finance or accounting. They have certain plugins, or marketing that interacts with Office that would trigger these rules, even though they weren't being malicious. The way that they interacted with Office would trigger those types of ASR rules. So Microsoft has added in these exclusions where you can add in a group that would still allow them to work if you wanted to have it bypassed. However, with the warning mode, I think that's pretty cool, because what that will actually do, and this actually works on Windows 10, 11, and on Windows Server. If someone tries to access a file, an application tries to access a file, and it triggers that rule, what it will do is allow you to unblock it. And if you click unblock, what it will do is, for a period of 24 hours, it'll let that rule be bypassed, and then it will automatically turn it up to that highest level of protection. So if you've got a marketing team that runs a specific add-in inside of Office once a month, they can run it that one day, and then they would still be protected the rest of the month without saying audit or bypass. So you still have the full grasp, you have the full breadth of those rules and that limited time frame of being able to run them.
Have you seen success using the warn mode with your customers? Because
it's gotten better.
we recently rolled out ASR, so I did it in phased approaches using warn mode,
Mm-hmm.
and not a single pop-up. All we're protecting like your screenshots.
Sure.
Nothing.
Was that with the Office suite that you were experiencing those before in like a audit mode or a block mode?
In what regard? What do you mean?
So, for example, for a rule that you previously had an audit, were you expecting it to be blocked? But just based on looking at some of the advanced hunting?
Yeah, well, so when we ran them in audit, there's a whole lot of entries, and I mean a whole lot to even decipher.
Yeah, that's usually
So
the
to
first
determine
part.
What's legit, what's not, right?
Yep.
So like, okay, let's just take it a step further. Let's crank it up to warn mode. Let's see what we start getting alerts for people.
Sure.
So we put it every single rule in warn mode, like for the IT department.
Yeah.
Example, which is 80 people. Nobody got pop-up, but things were still getting blocked. So warn is supposed to give you a pop-up.
Right.
Plus block it and give you that option to allow it anyway.
Yep.
It was doing the blocking, but never a pop-up. So I was just curious.
And you're definitely running 1809 or later?
Yeah, around 21.
Oh, you're on 21H2. I've not heard of those instances. I definitely would be curious to look at what your hunting is.
We just move forward with it.
I saw something that somebody posted on LinkedIn about that. I just don't remember what the solution was.
Sure.
Was it like a policy that had to complement it, maybe
I'm
from?
gonna guess it was some type of device restriction profile, maybe blocking certain post notifications.
Oh,
something.
Sure.
But I never did figure it out.
That could be
We
it.
ended up moving forward, so.
But no, I have seen this used successfully for certain teams, along with the combination of the exclusions. You know, for some of them, you just straight block. Maybe finance or marketing is probably the most common one. They just bypass it for that group of users so they can continue to use it. So that's one of the built-in features of Windows that we'll use. And then, as I like to say, the nirvana of ASR, controlled folder access. Very few customers I've seen that have rolled this out in full block mode. They've been able to get a little more aggressive with that block disk modification for ASR. So if something is trying to just make a change in one of those protected folder locations, then it will block it. Microsoft's added some of the bypass folders and applications within the last year or so. Because previously, this was another one of those all or nothing settings. You either had controlled folder access turned on or off. And you'd be surprised like how impactful that is to a lot of users being able to run some of their applications. So this is another one where if you take that step up with your security posture, you can get ASR rules on, then start focusing on controlled folder access and understand what applications that you need to have specific access. Then that can start to dovetail in maybe where you would want to look at things like endpoint privilege management and some of those apps that need to have some of that elevated access, and if you actually need to have those in place.
And Chris, can I just flip back to this for just a moment so I can kick off the autopilot reset?
Yeah, go for it.
I have it here.
Yeah, go ahead and take over screen share, cool, if you wouldn't mind.
Alrighty, I'll have it on both screens in just a moment. Alright, so I'm doing some Inception stuff over here with the Surface, so don't mind this. It did update in the portal, so the name is updated now to the new name that we set earlier, so demo serial number. And then here's the company portal that it downloaded and installed. It installed Google Chrome, and it successfully installed all of the Office suite. Normally, also, I would uninstall Mail and Calendar and, some of the default stuff that is redundant because of Office. We have our web link and Adobe Reader here as well. So we'll hit install and it'll install.
Which method did you use to install Chrome again?
I packaged it using the Win32 app packaging utility.
Yeah, they don't have it in the WinGet portal, which I thought was weird.
I wonder why.
Well, it's probably because they want to use Edge. I think you're being smart as I started saying that, I was like, I heard the sarcasm.
So yeah, all right. So what I'm going to do after this installs, it's just going to install. So it'll install again once I initiate the autopilot reset as well. So I'll flip back to that then. I just wanted to update everyone on this at the moment.
So I got a question. When you use that new Intune packaging tool
Mhm.
to install Chrome, on the flip side, when you install it through that new Microsoft Store version, it always keeps it up to date. Will Chrome stay up to date?
Chrome stays up to date on its own, unless you give it a specific XML file, which is configurable within the enterprise installer, which is what I used, and that's the MSI installer. You don't want to, for Chrome specifically, you don't want to use the consumer installer because it's a web-based and GUI-based.
Microsoft's actually introduced a lot of those settings that traditionally were GPOs for Chrome into the settings catalog. So that way you don't have to have that, you have to have an XML for
On our
that.
machines that have Chrome installed, if the users are not actively using Chrome, not launching it, it will not update. And it gets put into our vulnerability list and
Oh, funny.
saying that's out of date when we have all these
It's inactive.
automated updates turned on. So
Now-
Just push everyone to Edge.
that's right.
I mean, it's.
Now in that case, I'm not sure then if Enterprise would do that automatically or not, because as far as I know, it does update on its launch, so it'd probably run into the same issue if I had to guess.
You could also just repack a newer version and supersede the old one and uninstall and then reinstall that new one. And that,
Every 5 days when the update.
yeah,
Right.
I mean, once it hits a vulnerability,
It's called
so
job
you
security.
deal with it, you know. Yeah. I spent 2 hours on this every 5 days.
Cool. So is this reader installing per user, or is it for the whole system?
So in that
I
case,
set
you
that
had it
one to
published, right?
user. I had it published to user, but I believe that one had the option to do either.
Okay, because typically store apps are only per user, aren't they? Or has
This
that
is
changed?
where the new store is a little bit different. I have seen apps that some of them are pre-configured and you aren't able to choose just based on the nature of the app, but there are some that are able to be installed machine made. I believe Adobe Reader is one, because when it does it that way, it'll install it in the default profile because it uses some of the same mechanisms as the Intune management extension, so it operates a little bit differently than the old store did.
Okay.
Thanks for that. We'll keep an eye on this install, and then once it's done, we'll kick off a reset, and then we'll break out the stopwatch, see how long it takes. All right, so back over to ASR, another really popular component of this. If I've got time and I'm trying to fire up one of my Windows 365 PCs, it's Defender Application Guard. And so if we look at the settings of this, what's really cool is through things like policies in the settings catalog, as well as, just the settings catalog, you can control what websites are allowed in your normal day-to-day browsing for your end users. So you can have a list of managed websites that a user can access inside of Edge. Anything outside of that, you tell it to push it out into an application guard session, which is essentially a virtualized version of Edge on your same machine that is essentially sandboxed. So all your day-to-day web browsing, all of your day-to-day, if people are your end users are trying to access websites that you don't have that's allowed, you can still allow them to get to them, but they're in this sandbox version. So it looks and feels just like Edge. It's a little slower, but that's in part to the fact that it is essentially running in a hypervised instance of that application on your machine. So there is some pretty strict requirements around CPU virtualization turned on. You have to have the application guard setting turned on, which you can push through Intune, but then it will allow you to actually run that app in that virtualized instance itself as well.
Is that the one that forces a 10-minute countdown, a 10-minute reboot countdown on user?
If you deploy it, yes, I think it does. So that's why it's nice to have it turned on as you're pushing out new devices, or in some cases, running maybe a proactive remediation or with a script that has like a pop-up. Because yeah, this is one that is unpredictable. You push down that setting and
me on an entire company.
yeah. Well, now they're more secure. They're browsing, right? Everyone has the application virtualization now.
There's a follow-up email right after that.
Yeah, Yep.
For some reason, it didn't happen on a majority of the devices. So it was stopping.
Make sure they're still Intune enrolled properly. The other component outside of, there's a couple other components like exploit guard that requires an XML. There's some other like the device restrictions that I'm not going to get into it right now. We want to talk about account protection. So being able to turn on and turn off or control Hello for Business is a big one. As customers and organizations move into, oh, that's awesome.
This can do that.
Awesome. As companies move into getting hardware that is Windows Hello for Business ready, like cameras and fingerprint readers, they're able to use these features. Being able to add in administrators and remove different administrators to a machine, actually have a proactive remediation I've run with certain customers for this that will go through and clean up their administrators group unless they've fallen within certain usernames or GUIDs. So then that way they're forced to elevate their credentials using Azure Active Directory Device Administrators Group through PIM, or drumroll, through Laps, Windows Laps. That's finally, after all this time, now in Intune. And originally it was only supported on Windows 11, but then they said, all right, as long as you have the April 11, 2023 security update on your device, we'll support Windows 10 and Server 2019 or higher, which is great. This is another additional added management vector inside of Intune that you can have for your servers of being able to do password rotations on those devices too. And to be able to go through and access that, it's actually as easy as going into the device properties and then going into the local administrator and showing that password. And the nice thing is if you go back into those settings, you do have flexibility on how you assign and rotate that password. So in this case, we say we want to back up that password to Azure Active Directory only, and we want to rotate it every 30 days. Here's the administrator account because we don't have a secondary one on the machine, which is usually not the case. But then we can actually define the password link complexity and how we want to actually change it, which is something you don't necessarily, I think, have inside of the AD Labs itself. So in this case, it will gracefully reset the password on that device and store it into AD. So that was a big addition. I've used the Cloud Labs. I don't know if any of you have heard that one. It's another one that's really driven based off of Azure, and it's a proactive remediation. I did the math on like a 1,500 user company. It's like $100 a month to run all the resources in Azure. And now that Microsoft actually has it built into Windows, I'm like, I could have used this 6 months ago on a project.
$100 a month and 1,500 users?
Yeah, because of all of those devices checking in.
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
that's a very cheap cost.
Yeah. It's not too bad for a password rotation from a non-Microsoft perspective. And it was all, the only downside to it is it didn't support servers because it was only looking at Intune enrolled devices.
So
The nice,
yeah.
yeah, and as long as the servers can talk to Intune in this case, then it will actually have that built into the native GUI.
So we got all your 2016 servers.
Yep, that's the only downside is that step up to that Windows 10 code set.
So I heard this was being released, but does it apply to hybrid joined right now as well?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
you can have it actually still store a password in AD if you wanted to inside of the profile settings. Actually,
I've been using proactive remediation to rotate it every 30 and
yep.
scroll it out.
Does it work with registered devices or only one?
It will work with hybrid in Azure AD. So let me pull up the policy real quick under.
So in theory, if we wanted to have somebody from help desk, we can actually give them the help desk role, and then they can access this online and look at the maps versus going directly to Active Directory or your main controller.
And that's one thing that you can now do inside of Intune too, is that granular roles. And I think that's one too that you have the ability to give them access to just view that specific that specific policy inside of Intune. So yeah, so if you go here into the lapse policy, it looks like there's actually 3 devices that are checked in. But if we edit this policy, I just wanted to show you the options here. So you can do it either to Azure AD or Active Directory, which, I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer there. We want to have it in the cloud and have it accessible. But in terms of devices, any device that's Intune registered will do it. So as long as it can talk to the device, it should be able to talk to that account and rotate the password. Actually, let's see if we've got our Windows devices here. We've got this one that was our Windows 365 PC. It looks like it said that it checked in. So if we come over here, we look at the local administrator password. Okay, so maybe it hasn't. I'm thinking it might be one of the scenarios where if it's not, and I remember seeing this with Cloud Labs too, if the administrator account wasn't enabled, then it wouldn't rotate the password. So it actually had to be enabled for it to do that rotation. So that's typically a caveat. Let me check on this one. Yeah, so we'd have to go through and probably force a policy to enable that account so that way it would do the password rotation. Because if it's disabled, it's really not an attack vector.
How hard is it to, because I know there's legacy version of Labs and there's the cloud version. How hard is it to convert the organization from legacy as they call it to?
You just turn off the GPO, I believe, and uninstall the agent, because there was an agent that you had to run on machines too, I believe, that did that to check in with the lap server. So you can just turn off the GPO and uninstall the app. So that was another big improvement. And then I think this is the one that everyone was waiting for. Oh, endpoint privilege management. So in terms of looking at how this is really enforced, there's really 2 components. There's the policy that actually controls how that particular feature is managed, and then there's actually the rule set. So the rule set itself, we'll look at the settings real quick. So there's not a whole lot here when it comes to settings. It's essentially just saying, okay, do you want this turned on? Yes. Do you want to have some of the reporting data sent? Yes. I want all the data. Give me everything, all elevations. And then in terms of the default elevation response, you'll want it to require user confirmation. So, I mean, you can have it deny requests or not configured, but this is essentially saying anytime that we want to have that elevation, we want to force it to have 2 levels of validation, the business justification and the Windows authentication. So if someone puts in their credentials and they have to put in why they want to elevate the application. So the other half is the rule set. So this is when we want to have that particular elevation to occur. So in this case, we have the user confirmed elevation, and then we have this one particular type. I didn't have the file hash for QuickBooks, but I got pretty darn close to the path and the executable. And typically QuickBooks doesn't really require elevation. So we didn't hunt around too much to try to find exactly what executable would require it every time. Probably could dig around a little bit, but I wanted to show this from the perspective of when you do the elevation, really there's, or actually when you go in there and you do how you're forcing the elevation, you've got that elevation rule, and again, you have how you're elevating, and then you have the file information. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is if we do, let's set up another instance. In this case, what we could be doing is we could be looking to make sure that a particular executable is signed before we allow that user to elevate the particular application. So in this case, maybe there was an app from, let's say, Adobe, and the Adobe Updater, I think was the example I heard earlier. We have that file hash, and we have that certificate that was tied to that publisher. We can add that in here. We can add that to the executable, and then we can add in the particular details around that application. So then that way, whenever it sees that application executed on the machine that needs to run under UAC, then that person has the ability to elevate it. So that's really the scope of how endpoint privilege management operates. It's a application based elevation versus an administrative based elevation. So
we've seen insurance requirements that say for installing or elevating UAC, they want MFA. Have you seen that qualify for MFA requirements?
I've not, no. At this point in time, from what I'm seeing, it's really just the justification and the credentials. So, and not necessarily forcing it to do like a two-factor. And essentially, I mean, putting in your credentials again after you logged in would be one factor. I wouldn't really consider business justification as a second factor. So, you know, as it sits right now, I would say probably not. I'd probably have to. Can you target this to specific machines? Yeah, absolutely. So this works very similarly to any of your other Intune policies. So I could come in here as from an assignment perspective, I could target it to all devices, some devices, or some users. So if I knew a specific group of users was accessing a specific app, then I could target that elevation to them to be able to provide that justification and get that reporting. So I wonder, this will be something really interesting to watch how this product evolves, is, you know, that level of reporting and being able to go into things like the advanced hunting and get some of that data. Would auditors say, if I can verify who accessed it and when, would that be sufficient? Or is that really, they need to have that two-factor verification?
How does the user run it as elevated?
They just double click on it, and with this policy assigned, then what will happen is they'll see that elevated prompt that we had. Let me come back over to here real quick. So they'll see. Oh, that was way back in the beginning. Sorry. They'll see the elevation prompt. Okay. Here, I think here we go. Yeah, I think that was back when we were talking about licensing. Hold on for the ride. There we go. There we go. So that's when they'll see this. So they'll open the app as administrator, and so this is what will elevate it for that user.
Enter credentials, is that just
the Windows
login?
There, yeah. If it's Azure AD join, it would just be their username and password.
Okay. Do you always require 2FA when people log in, or does it have?
Well, in this case, they'll already be at the desktop. Yeah. So it's as a first generation version of this, I think it does definitely fill a gap that wasn't there before, but it definitely has. It's gotten better. This wasn't there before, so. Device compliance, proactive remediation. We've got some other slides that, since we're running a little bit low on time, around compliance and proactive remediation. Definitely check out our session on Sessionize and let us know what you thought. So the decks will be uploaded into Sessionize the next couple of days. So where you looked at the schedule, the website and the app for the workshop day today, you'll be able to find the presentations there as well.
I do that normally in like a couple of hours to do that, because I've been to these sessions a lot. I do it a couple of hours, decking on.
Yeah. So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just a heads up on the status update too. We kicked it off at 3:50 and we are currently at 85% on the second round. So like any second now, it should be getting to the sign-on.
So it's Windows 11 is definitely quicker on a autopilot reset.
Do you find Intune time to be shorter on AD joined versus hybrid?
Oh yeah,
Azure AD
significantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean we're already at 95.